Okay, hello and welcome to the June 30th, 2021 HDC meeting. We are starting a little late, as you've noticed, because we've had an unprecedented amount of call-in folks who want to listen into the meeting. We should also be live on YouTube right now. We are going to put it on pause just for a few more minutes while we can get everyone situated who wants to listen into our meeting, and we will get started in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, and we're back. Thank you everyone for your patience as we worked through all of the people who wanted to join our meeting via telephone today. We really appreciate it. We're going to get started in just a minute. Before that, I'm Christy Harpst. I had a brief announcement. Primarily for the commissioners. The city attorney's office sent around a memo just prior to our meeting. If you're in the room, it is on your desk. If you're not in the room, it is in your email. It's just highlighting some statutory changes to our North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 160D, which goes into effect tomorrow. It consolidates land development statutes for cities and counties. And there are a couple of key statutes applicable to our Historic District Commission. There are very few changes that affect us. There are a lot more changes that affect other parts of the Land Development Code. But the memo summarizes the changes. Basically, the major changes are that our guidelines are now, as of July 1st, going to be called standards. Nothing else is changing with the guidelines. They're just being termed standards. There's an additional requirement for notice of hearings. So starting with our July meeting, all of the applicants will have a sign posted in their yard to help notify neighbors that there's a project at that property that is going to be under review at the monthly Historic District Commission meeting. We will also be writing written decisions for approvals and approvals with conditions, which we previously just relied upon the COA, but we are going to streamline all of those processes. And then it also identified that conflict of interest includes close familial relationship, and it just defined what that meant. So just some really minor changes. The biggest one really is that the guidelines are going to be called standards instead of guidelines, and that we're posting signage in everyone's yard. But with that, that's the only announcement I had. I'm happy to take questions from any of the commissioners or from any of the members of the public joining us. And I'm also glad to share anything more in detail. And we also have Jill Sanchez Myers, our attorney, present to answer any questions that are above me. If nothing, then I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Kim.
All right, thank you so much, Christy. And thanks for those of you who are joining us virtually. The Charlotte Historic District Commission welcomes you to the June 30th meeting. I'm Kim Parati, chairperson, and I call this meeting to order at 1:18 p.m. Also sitting on today's commission are Jim Hayden, Damon Rumsch, Jessica Heineman, and Phil Goodwin, who are present in the meeting room. The rest of the commissioners participating remotely include Chris Barth, Nichelle Bonaparte, PJ Henningsen, and Krista Lineberger. Also present are Cindy Kohanic, Candice Leidy, Grant, how do I pronounce Grant's last name again? Miachi, just as it's written. Yeah, Grant is not here. Jill Sanchez Myers, Linda Keish, and Candy Thomas. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are conducting this meeting using a remote online platform. I ask for your patience today as we proceed. There might be slight delays as we transition between speakers, participants, and presentations. Participants in today's evidentiary hearings were required to provide a copy of any presentation, document, exhibit, or other material that they wish to submit during the evidentiary hearing prior to today's meeting. All such materials, as well as a copy of city staff's presentations and documents, were posted online prior to this meeting and may be viewed by visiting the HDC webpage. No case is proceeding today in which anyone contacted the city to object to the remote online meeting platform. For everyone participating in today's virtual meeting, we ask that the following guidelines be observed. Please mute your audio when you're not speaking. Use only one source of audio, computer or phone. Do not put your phone on hold. Make sure you are in a quiet area. Please turn off or silence electronic devices and do not speak over the person talking, or you will be asked to leave the meeting. Please use the raise your hand tool. Please do not speak unless recognized by the chair or by staff. Because the commission is a quasi-judicial body, any speaker for or against an application must be sworn in. Due to the remote online nature of today's proceedings, any individual wishing to speak for or against an application was asked to sign up and provide any additional evidence in advance of the meeting. During the hearing, I will further open the floor to anyone who has joined the meeting today by telephone. When it is your turn to speak, please begin by stating your name and address. The review of each application consists of the presentation of the application and deliberation. The application is presented by the HDC staff. The commission will determine if there is sufficient information to proceed with the hearing. The applicant will present their testimony for the application. Other parties wishing to speak for or against will be given reasonable time to present factual sworn testimony based on the HDC design guidelines. The HDC may question the applicant and HDC staff members. HTC staff and the applicant will be given an opportunity for rebuttal and final comments. The HTC shall close the hearing for discussion and deliberation. During discussion and deliberation, only the commission and staff may speak. An HTC member may request the hearing to be opened for further questioning. The HTC will craft a motion for approval, continuation, or denial. The majority vote of the commission present is required for a decision to be reached. A final vote by the HTC will end the hearing. If you will be addressing the commission today, please raise your right hand and respond "I do" to the following question. Do you affirm that the testimony and information that you are about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth? Please be mindful that we have a court reporter present who is responsible for making an accurate and complete record of these proceedings. The reporter must be able to hear and understand. Everyone present must state their names before they speak clearly, loudly, and one at a time. The reporter will interrupt only when absolutely necessary to get clarification on what was just said or to alert speakers that they are having difficulty hearing or understanding. Are there any questions? All right, let's get started with our first case.
Jill Walker has her hand up. If
Okay.
you want to recognize Commissioner Walker.
Thank you,
Okay, and
Christy.
Jill is not attending the meeting as a commissioner today.
How come?
She has,
Did I say her
her
name?
plans have changed and she is able to join us now.
So let the record show that Jill Walker is also present and will be participating remotely. Commissioner Walker?
Thank you. I apologize for the confusion.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Commissioner Walker?
I just wanted to make sure you recognize that I was present. and
Okay,
accounted for
thank you
that.
for doing that. I
Thanks.
appreciate that. So Jill Walker is here. Is
Thank you.
participating.
Yes.
Okay.
Very important. Okay, so before I get into the application, I think we should just confirm that John, you are with us, and is Haley with us?
I am here. This is John Abish, and I believe Haley is as well.
Okay. And you both raised your hands and were sworn in just a minute ago?
Yes, I did.
Great, thank you. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll run through your presentation very quickly. All the commissioners have reviewed the presentations in depth, so I'd ask that you kind of limit your presentation to about 10 minutes if you can, and the relevant guidelines, and maybe address any issues with the staff analysis. This will allow a greater opportunity for dialogue between you and the commission with questions that specific questions they have about your project. So with that, the first case is 325 and 331 East Boulevard. It is the proposal for new construction on these two vacant lots. It is a multifamily project. You can see here on the map the location at the corner of Euclid and East Boulevard. A more detailed analysis of the site showing a bird's eye view of East Boulevard and Euclid and the surrounding properties. There are some example inspiration photos that the applicant has included. And then the elevations are on slide 14, 15, 16, and 17. I believe the applicant has also provided an additional Euclid Avenue elevation in the supplemental material that is at the end of this presentation. For any of you joining us online, the supplemental information is also linked on the agenda on the HTC website. We have streetscapes showing the location of the new buildings and how they fit in on the streetscape elevation. We also have it for Euclid. We have some section drawings with some height dimensions and details. There are also some perspective drawings that the applicant has provided and a little bit of supplemental information with a little more information about trees and landscaping on the property. And with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you to give your presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Christy. Thank you everyone for your time. I will be clear, concise, straight to the point, hopefully, and stay within the 10 minutes. Appreciate your time. So as Christy stated, this project is a proposed project for 3- and 4-story townhomes. There are 6 units per building on this site. Christy, could you please go back to the site plan slide? Well, the one showing the units. There we go. I guess if you could zoom in a little bit, that would be helpful. There are 6 units per building. What we did is divide it up into 2 separate buildings. There's a total of 4 3-story units facing East Boulevard, and a total of 4 4-story units facing Euclid Avenue, and then 4 facing the left side of the property. The 4th floor of these units is set back over 10 feet from the face of the building to minimize the impact along the pedestrian streetscape of Euclid Avenue. The 4-story units also have private 2-car garages that are accessed from a center alley that connects to the rear alley along Euclid Avenue. This hides the cars from view along East Boulevard and Euclid, which we thought was very important to this corner. The 3-story units facing East Boulevard do not have garages. We are gearing those units more towards a pedestrian-minded owner, which helps us push us towards a more pedestrian-friendly East Boulevard. We think there is a movement towards that, and we are excited about that option and opportunity. If you could go back to the drone view, the previous slide before this, Christy, that one right there, yes. So this project is located within the business zoning, as you know, 88 feet away from the closest single-family use. So as an architect, I have to look at the zoning requirements as well, and we wanted to make sure that we were well within the constraints of zoning, both zoning and HDC guidelines, of course. If you could go back to the site plan, Christy, I apologize. There we go. So the proposed project along East Boulevard sits 44 feet away from the face of building to the face of curb, per the requirement, and aligns with the neighboring property. The porches along East Boulevard are 34 feet minimum from the face of curb as well, which is aligned with the zoning requirements and consistent with the neighboring property. The face of building along Euclid is 18 feet back from the setback, which is consistent with the original historic building that was there. So from a HDC criteria, the spacing requirement, which is the side distance from adjacent buildings as it relates to other buildings, we kept that spacing consistent with the original historic buildings, 2 separate buildings on site, like I said, extending a nod to that original spacing. The orientation, obviously the main orientation is towards East Boulevard, and you have 4 porches and main entries facing East Boulevard. If you could go back to that front elevation along East Boulevard now. There we go. In speaking to the elevations and talking about massing and complexity of form, the design that we chose to go with is more geared towards American Foursquare with hints of craftsman style. The project is 2 separate structures to minimize the massing and comparable to the 2 previous buildings that were there. The units facing East Boulevard are stepped down to 3 stories to align with the existing rhythm that's there right now. And the recesses occur at the main entrances and overhead balconies in a symmetrical fashion with brick pilasters and column projections that wrap the entries to accentuate the main entries. And that was a comment that we received at the workshop meeting, that the entries needed to be more accentuated and more of a focal point on the entries. So we worked through that. If you could go to the Euclid elevation, please. There we go. Perfect. Now this is an important elevation, obviously, to the neighborhood as well as to the HDC. You can see the 3 stories stepping up to 4 stories as you move down Euclid Avenue. The top floor, though, 4th floor, I broke it up as much as we could to minimize the impact along the streetscape. That face of the 4th floor is set back over 10 feet from the face of road. So from an experiential level, at ground level, you will not see that 4th floor. In 2D, we obviously see it, but you'll see in the renderings later on that you don't see that impact of the 4th floor. As far as height and width, we have 41 feet and a half inch to the roof line from grade at the tallest point, 39 feet in width of each building face along East Boulevard and 16 feet distance between the two buildings along East Boulevard. There are no real height comparables to match the proposed project within a 360-degree range here. But the original ridges that I was looking at from the original corner lot was at 780 feet in elevation, but we're proposing a different ridge line. So the eave is actually 5 feet lower than the original ridge of the gable roof along Euclid, which I thought was good to point out. As far as scale, the scale of the proposed project is experienced like a 3-story residential structure, as the 4th floor is set back. Due to the step back in the top level, the scale of the project relates well to the surrounding context and creates a strong presence on this corner. The main entries are pulled down to human scale with the use of lower canopies and canopy lines and roof lines. The balconies for private open space and front porches on East Boulevard are provided to activate the streetscape, providing consistency with the previous building front porches as well as the neighboring properties. As far as rhythm is concerned in the criteria, the proposed rhythm is symmetrical because it's we're gearing towards that American Foursquare, which is very symmetrical in nature. And the recesses and projections are applied at the appropriate locations to maintain a logical rhythm without over exaggerating the recesses and projections. As far as directional expression, I think that speaks for itself. Remains compatible with the surrounding context and remains compatible with the original intent of the original buildings. Foundations are raised a little bit. There's a little bit of grade on this site, and as we finalize that grading, we want to have stoops along East Boulevard, so you'll step up a couple steps to the entry, which is in line with the original buildings that were there. As far as roof form and materials, the main roof is to be architectural asphalt shingles like you see in the neighborhood. Hip roof with hip roof dormers. This is something that I talked about with the DCA when I met with them about. I was proposing some arched roof dormers, but it really didn't fit within the context. So we discussed that, and I went back to the hip roof dormers that we typically do see in the neighborhood with American Foursquare. The lower canopy levels along Euclid Avenue will be standing seam metal roof just to provide a little bit of variety. As far as doors and windows, we are proposing aluminum clad windows with a 3/2 top sash. And that 3/2 is indicative of the original building that was there. I know American Foursquare does 1/1 a lot with, no muttons, but we really liked the 3/2 that was on the original building and wanted to provide a little nod towards that. We have 6-inch trim around all doors and windows, gearing towards a craftsman style with the 2-inch trim head above the main trim at the head of windows and doors. The top floor windows, I'm showing them as a picture frame trim, and it provides a little variety to the elevations and gives hierarchy to the windows on the first and second level with a little variety. The porches are a craftsman style porch with those double columns. I think it provides a more stronger kind of corner presence and edge presence with some 8x8 columns. We're looking at stained wood or painted wood. Obviously, the materials are brick, wood lap siding currently, but I'd like to discuss that further with the board with questions. If you could go to the streetscapes, please. The East Boulevard streetscape. There we go. Perfect. So the proposed project does comply with the zoning requirements, but is more importantly is, we believe, is respectful of the surrounding historic context with the massing that we are providing. It doesn't overly exaggerate the height. We don't feel like we're overreaching with height request here. And it adds variety to the sizes in the surrounding context, and it creates a stronger corner presence here. If you could go to the building section, please. Which would be the slide. There we go. So if you look at the building section, and you'll see it further in the renderings later, but if you look at the Euclid streetscape on the far left side, you'll see that there's a lot of recess and projection. So there's a lot of activation along the street, but also that setback on the top level with that roof terrace overlooking Euclid. You will not experience that from the ground level, but one of the comments during the workshop was, hey, this elevation feels kind of flat. Now, it was just a massing model at the time, but we really looked at that and worked through it and made sure that it was not only aesthetically pleasing from the outside, but also still livable from the inside of the unit. So if you could go to the materials and details sheet, which is the next sheet, there we go. So the project is masonry, veneer, brick along the base with wood trim, wood lap siding, and a 4-inch reveal on the top level, and the first 2 floors being an 8-inch reveal with wood trim, aluminum clad windows that is allowed, solid wood entry doors that have that craftsman style hint to them, and the asphalt shingle roof at the top roof, as well as standing seam metal roofs at the porches, and some specialty roofs along the pedestrian level. One of the things that we would like to talk about further is where longer term materials are allowed to be used, like cementitious siding. If it's possible, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, if that would be allowed just from a standpoint of long-term maintenance for owners. And as far as the renderings, can you please go to the next slide, which would be our supplemental images? Thank you very much. So this is a rendering looking at the building proposed project from the corner of East and Euclid. They showcase the American Foursquare design with a historic color palette. I think the color chosen here is also an important part of the project. I mean, we could paint this bright yellow if we wanted to, but I don't think that would be very fitting to the neighborhood. So we want to showcase that we're really trying to be as thoughtful as possible about really fitting into the historic context, including the color palette. If you could go to the next slide image. There we go. This is facing Euclid along the streetscape, showing the landscaping as well. As we cannot forget the importance of the landscaping on any project here, especially in Dilworth, where the Olmsted brothers would be pushing this. So we're excited to share our landscape supplemental images, and Haley Duggar is on the call as well, who provided this design, and I will let Haley speak to these images, and I will wrap up after she's done.
Hi, this is Haley Duggar. So this kind of just shows what we have as existing trees, and we're working with an arborist right now to look at what tree should stay, what should go, what would be impacted by site. So we will provide that in the future, but we're trying to go ahead and provide our imagery is inspired by our mitigation plan, but obviously will change with comments from the arborist and this commission. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. You can continue. Okay, so this, like I said, this is providing inspiration for a mitigation plan. Although the tree spacing, is pending, I think the overall spatial connections remain. So you can see here that we are planning an active lawn on East Boulevard. This will help activate the space. This gives an amenity area for the residents. And between the sidewalk and the lawn is going to be a buffer area with nice landscape, as well as landscaped in front of the units themselves. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this one is really just building upon the character John has already described. It's more of the inspiration and our attention, not the exact details or model. You can go to the next slide. So this slide is a really great representation of our concept. We have some positive landscape. It's inspired by Dilworth's character. It's clean, it's crisp design. We have this open lawn space, and the color palette is really simple. We just have, green, purple, and white. But the variety of textures is going to provide a lot of interest. We'll have hedges, perennials, grasses to keep that variety. And hoping that this is going to seamlessly fit into the character of Dilworth. Go to the next slide. So this is the beginning of our color palette and our species. We want to have rich and full, and like I said, variety in texture, but similar color palettes. This plant palette is definitely pending. Depending on, what Dilworth needs for species. That's all I have to say. John, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Haley. Appreciate it. So I'm just going to summarize at this point. The proposed project really, we believe, aligns with the surrounding context and fills the need for more pedestrian activation along East Boulevard. I doubt we want another insurance company located at this corner or a real estate company. So we think having a pedestrian friendly residential building will help activate the future of East Boulevard, which is also aligned with what the city of Charlotte is hoping to encourage. And we look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Okay, do we have anyone on the line? We do have.
We do. We have a number of people that would like to speak. The first up is Ellen Citarella. She has provided information that she would like to speak to. It is on the screen. Ellen, are you with us?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
Have you been sworn in?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you and I'll run the slideshow for you. Just let me know when to move forward.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ellen Citarella. I live at 322 East Kingston Avenue. That is on the block that's parallel to this project. My neighbors and I were saddened when first the Magic Maze and then the Miller apartment buildings were demolished some years ago. Those two buildings were literally cornerstones of that highly visible intersection of East Boulevard and Euclid since the early 1900s. Slide, please. Chrissy? Yeah, thanks. We were encouraged to hear that the concept for the new development on that corner was along the lines of 2 quadruplexes, since we have lots of quads in Dilworth. Here are some nearby examples. 401 East Boulevard being right across Euclid from this property, and that's, there you go, on the lower image. Slide, please. It was also interesting to see the design inspirations included in the packet, because while those developments are several blocks away, the scale, mass, and size of the buildings is compatible with the character of our historic district. I do want to point out at 525, which is that right image, 525 East, yeah, there is a lot of articulation going on there along, I think that is Winthrop, which does break up the massing. In addition, their parking is underground. So that has limited that structure to 3 stories. And the ones, cottages on Euclid, that's basically 2 stories fronting Euclid. Slide, please. Scale. You can see from the graphic how the building dwarfs that human form depicted in it. There are no 4-story buildings in this area, nor in the district, to my knowledge. While we're looking at this slide, another thing I'd like to point out is that door. It's got side panels, and I think you can see it, even though it's very small. So we don't feel that the scale meets the guidelines. Slide, please. Height. So we did meet with John. We had a nice meeting with John in March, and at the time we mentioned the height, which was a concern of ours based on the fact that it's 4 stories. We disagree that you cannot see it from the street. So it hasn't changed since then. This 4-story building is taller than any historic building within blocks on East Boulevard and taller than any historic building on Euclid, appearing to be 5 feet taller than those around it. At the 4th story, we find that offset, the way it's not centered, to be unusual, and it appears to be an awkward add-on. Slide, please. So the Euclid elevation. The mass of the Euclid elevation has been troublesome since I watched the workshop with the commissioners back in March. And I walk through here, and I know how the previous building felt along the sidewalk. In this case, a pedestrian walking along the sidewalk on Euclid toward the intersection with East Boulevard will see a flat rear wall of a 4-story building with a relatively flat roof above it. That giant wall will loom over the person just a couple feet off the sidewalk as they approach East Boulevard. More articulation on the Euclid side of the building and adjustments to the roof line are necessary. In addition, and this is that left image, that 2nd-story porch, or those porches on the front, protrude out from underneath the roof. I have right in front of me, I'm sitting at my window in front of my house. There are 4 squares on our block, this 300 block here. None of them have a porch like that. None of them have a configuration of a porch like that. Slide, please. Size. The dimensions along Euclid are unclear to me from the packet, and still, even though I've seen the supplement today, because for one thing, I know that sidewalk is 5 feet. I don't know what that 6-foot dimension is shown there. I don't know what it's indicating. The distance from the building footprint to the property line is not shown as far as I can tell, but it certainly does not appear to be in line with the side yard of the building across the street, which is a quadruplex across Euclid. So in closing, and as I said initially, we are encouraged with the quadruplex-like concept of this project on this highly visible intersection of the neighborhood. We look forward to seeing some necessary changes to bring it in line with the character of our Dilworth Historic District and to make it a project that we can support. And in closing, and as always, I want to thank you, commissioners, for all of the time that you spend. I know it's a long, long time reviewing and discussing these applications in order to preserve the character of the historic districts of our city. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Ellen.
you, Ellen. Would we like to go through all of the speakers and then
Sounds
allow-
good.
Okay.
I'm sure John's making notes.
Yes.
Okay.
We have an unidentified caller number 1. Caller number 1, would you identify yourself and just let us know if you want to speak on this project or not?
Hi, this is Victoria Lemieux, and I do not need to speak.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I was unclear also if the DCA President Franklin wanted to speak on both this project and the next project. Franklin, are you with us?
I am here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you sworn in?
I am sworn in.
Would you like to make any comments about this project?
Yes, I would actually. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, commissioners, everyone, John. My name is Franklin Keithley. I live at 523 East Kingston Avenue, and I'm the president of the Dilworth Community Association. Today, I am delivering the following statement on behalf of the DCA in opposition to this project in its current form. Recent requests for commercial developments, which are now under review by the HDC, have sparked questions from the community. Neighbors feel that commercial and large developments are not being held to the same standards as private residential additions and new construction. Where are the applicable guidelines to allow the commissioners to deal with these large commercial developments we are now seeing in the historic districts? The DCA is opposing HDC RMA 2021-00235 for 325 and 331 East Boulevard because it does not meet the HDC guidelines for height, massing, and scale. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for everything you do.
Thanks, Franklin. I don't think we have anybody else. Is there anybody else on the line who wishes to speak?
Christy, it's Candace.
Hi,
I have Kemper Boyd on
Boyd?
the line online as well.
Okay, Kemper, would you like to speak on this project? And part 2 of my question is, have you been sworn in?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. The floor is yours.
My name is Kemper Boyd. I live at 314 East Kingston Avenue. I've been following this project a little bit, but my main concern is the size of it and the traffic issues. I know that doesn't have anything to do with the HDC, but right now on East Kingston, on our 300 block of East Kingston, we have people that park on our street that work over on East Boulevard. We have people who park on our street that go into South End at night. We have cars left over the weekends. And now we're going to put this place in that doesn't have sufficient parking in it. The HDC several years ago allowed a cul-de-sac on the 400 block of East Kingston. So those people aren't impacted by the cars as we are on the 300 side. And then with the median at Euclid and East Boulevard makes turning left off of Euclid very difficult to do. And now we're going to add all these other cars. I realize that the developer says that a lot of these people will be pedestrians. That remains to be seen. So that is my concern. It's just the size of this on such a small lot. It seems to be something that we deal with over and over. I have lived in Dilworth for the better part of 25 years, and it just seems to be getting worse by the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemper. Okay, so John, I'll let you respond to Ellen, Franklin, and Kemper, and please keep your comments to the anything that deals with the HDC design guidelines. We do not handle parking. That is not in our purview. So John, when you respond, please respond to anything that deals with design guidelines.
Understood. Well, my response would be, I completely understand the concerns there. We're proposing 4 stories on 8 of the 12 units. So overlooking Euclid is probably the most important one. I think the step back along Euclid to that 4th floor, which is really a small floor, that just adds some added value to the people living there. I understand 3 stories would be preferred for a lot of the community, but when we're providing ground floor, private parking in these garages, we need that 4th floor to allow for a good living situation. I'm in the position as an architect to provide both a design that pleases the HDC and zoning requirements, but also people that want to live there. So I think townhomes are a better product than, flats. And I think this is a product that people are going to want to live in. As far as the doors that face the side along Euclid, I could have placed them facing, perpendicular to the road, but I think as you walk by, you'll see main entry doors for a longer percentage of the time that you're walking down the elevation. And as far as door design is concerned, that's obviously we can work through that and fix that design to be a little more compatible. As far as porches not matching up with other American Foursquares, we can work through that and tweak that as needed. I just wanted to make sure that we provided a thoughtful balcony railing design and a roof design that might be a little different than what we see, but I think variety is important as long as there's passion and kind of soul put into the design and not something that's an afterthought. So I think that's all I'll say about that. I understand the height concerns, but we have tried to minimize the height as much as we can and still make this a livable product. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, so commissioners, it's our turn. Questions of the applicant. Damon?
Hi, John. I'm Damon. I'm going to go through a list of things. Some of them are not questions, but I want to give you the opportunity to respond to them now rather than when we're closed in session.
Okay.
First of all, the front elevation, I think with you going with a 4-square look is really it's a wonderful direction, and the space between them, I think, I encourage that. Let me start with the Euclid Avenue elevate. I guess it's streetscape, Christy, where it shows the 2 buildings. See, is that? It's this one in our
Oh,
handout.
okay, yep.
It kind of shows it best. It's a little blown up.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one.
Oh, I don't know what slide it is.
Um,
Well, it's the slide from the agenda supplement submitted by Ellen Citarella that says height.
Okay, so East Boulevard is our busy boulevard. It's where our density is before we start working into the smaller neighborhood buildings. I think that you need to stay below the ridge lines of the existing buildings on either side. And I think the 4-story is really pushing it. So as I said, I'm going to make some comments. I may ask some questions, but a lot of this is going to be comments. So if you have a chance, and you may want to just respond to them after I go through several of them. So I feel pretty strongly about the fourth story not being there. The porches on the second floor, and this kind of shows that also. Normally the railings are inside or attached to the columns. And I don't know, Christy, if you can zoom in on that one.
If it would be
Picture.
easier to see on,
Yeah,
right here, or
yeah,
even
that's the corner, or maybe on the front one.
maybe on,
Yeah, you can see it there too. So I'm not sure, and this, I guess, is a question. Why did you choose by having the roof of the porch exceed the width of the front facade, and then on top of that, putting the railing on the outside of the columns? You've kind of dwarfed what's underneath it and put a lot of weight. So there's a really strong, I guess, the strong massing on the second story, which I think doesn't really fit to that four square. So I guess in general, my comment to the front is, if you're going to use the four square language, then I think you should stay to it. And if you want to vary in terms of some details, fine, but that's a detail that changes the proportions of the building. So, but in general, I think that this facade, except for the fourth story and the porches and maybe some of the scaling on that front, the pieces of the building to each other, this generally works, I think. But once you turn the corner on Euclid, I just have a lot of problems with that. First of all, I was out there this afternoon and measured some of the setbacks of the buildings that are behind it. Let's see if I can. So, Christy, if you go to, I guess the site plan would work best, because it just shows a little bit of the, the one that they showed the building, the new site plan, their drawing.
okay. Do you want, would you like the one with the trees or without the trees?
The one that shows the side of,
Okay.
I can't tell whether there are trees. Let me show you this.
This
picture.
one?
Yes.
Okay, slide 13.
Yep. So so the building, okay, so behind your building on Euclid, there's an alley, and then behind that, there's a building. That building from the street, from the street side of the curb to the thermal wall of that building is 31 feet. So, okay, so conceptually, you're dealing with fronts of houses along Euclid. So you're coming along this front setback and then coming to a side yard setback that's thrown all the way to the sidewalk. So at the very least, that building should start respecting the front setbacks in the buildings behind it and start stepping back in. Or, which would really be better, is present that maybe the front piece of that building all the way, and then the whole building step back that 31 feet, respecting. And so not only is the building behind it on the other side of the alley at 31 feet, but if you go to the next building, it's at 32 feet with a screen porch that comes back into the front setback by another 8 feet. So even that one is at 28, but I think it's 24 feet. I think it's 24 feet off the curb. So what the footprint of this plan does not respect what's going on in the neighborhood at all behind your building. The front, each one of those, so you've divided the building up into kind of sections, but instead of it reading as individual units with a front door, you've tucked doors into the side, and now all of a sudden it looks like the side of a very large building. So because this is the streetscape, and because we want the front door to relate to the front yard and to the sidewalk, it's very important that there's a layering that goes on and that there's an appearance of a front entrance into the building, which you lose because of the way you've designed that. And I think that's relatively easy to change, but I think the setback is probably my biggest issue. And then the layering on the Euclid side. Anyway, that's everything. If you'd like to respond.
I would say obviously one of the biggest things is the setback concern. So 18 feet to building face to back of curb is what's required. And from what was there initially, the previous building, it was that close. So we were just basically kind of going back to that and not really trying to put, and if we pushed those units back to 31 feet, that would kill the central alley between the units. So people would not be able to park behind it. So we felt that it was important to hide the garages with allowing cars to go within that central alley, which of course the domino effect is we have to push those units closer to the curb as we were pushing for more a pedestrian along the sidewalk, getting those building faces close to the sidewalk as possible.
So what you're saying is in order to keep the square footage that you're adding, wanting to put on this lot, you need to keep it close to the street is what you're saying. Is that right?
Partially. But basically, in order for the central alley to work, we have to have a specific width between units for a car to be able to access it, which requires us to make sure we push those units as close as possible to the sidewalk. But we also felt that it was a benefit to have them close to the sidewalk as we want to push for that pedestrian activated elevation.
How many square feet was the building that you're replacing? The old building?
That was good question. I have that number. I don't have it right in front of me. I believe it was.
John, we can let you look for that and maybe hear from some other
sorry.
commissioners.
Okay, and then my other question then would be is what is the square footage on this building?
Got it.
And my point is, whatever those numbers are, you're gaining quite a bit of square footage is my guess. And what you're trying to do is make it larger and without regard to the streetscape.
So the original building along the corner was about 3,900 square feet, and our footprint is around 5,200.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rumsch. Commissioner Bonaparte.
I just had a quick question regarding the side yard on Euclid. What is that measurement? Because I couldn't tell either.
On Euclid, the side yard,
Yes.
there's an 8-foot dimension from back of curb to the sidewalk, 18 feet from back of curb to the property line.
I'm just talking about from Euclid to the side of the building. What is that?
That would be 19 feet to the building.
I think I'm missing something.
I think Michelle means the setback of the building to the property line.
So the setback of the building to the property line per zoning, it's a setback from the curb. So there's technically no setback to the property line. It's from the back of curb. So our building face is 1'2" off the property line.
John, so from the back of the curb to the actual building, is that 19 feet or 18 feet?
19 feet.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
further questions, Commissioner Bonaparte?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
Can I just respond to Damon real quick again? Damon, when I said 2,900 square feet for the original building, the actual footprint of the new proposed building is also 2,972. I said 5,200, but that was for both buildings. So from a square footage standpoint, it's actually very close to the original layout.
And in terms of the 3 foot, in terms of the total square footage, because your building is not 1 story or 2 story, it's 4 story. So
Correct.
the square footage you're gaining, not only, it may be in a footprint might be the similar, but as it presents to the street is much larger. That's my point
Correct.
with this.
Okay, understood.
All right. Commissioner Barth.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, John. I also agree with a lot of what Damon said, so I won't uh, try to go over that too much, particularly with the massing. I agree with his comments about the fourth story. I think that's definitely pushing it, even though it is setback. It is facing the interior part of the residential neighborhood. I know we have a commercial property directly behind you, but we also have houses within sight of this, so they're definitely going to see the mass of this building from a distance, which presents an issue. I'd advise you to potentially look at some other projects, multifamily projects in the neighborhood within proximity, which I think you have. But look at some of the massing elements and strategies that they've done. For example, like if we have a 2.5 story, it's still 3 stories, but reads as a 2-story with occupiable attic space. I think that might be effective. Some questions I have. Oh, and then to Damon's point here about the setback, particularly with the commercial property behind you all, Damon, I think that property, considers Euclid their front elevation, so that building is set back further. And to John's point, the previous house that was there was closer to the property line. However, that being said, the size and mass of the proposed building is vastly different than what was there before. So I think, it might be valuable for you all to articulate and provide some mass reducing strategies on the backside of the building, just because it will be more visible. As far as my questions, you mentioned 2 things that I just didn't quite understand. You said picture frame window trim. Was that correct, or did you say picture windows? I just wanted to clarify.
Picture frame, just no, 2-inch head trim above the actual frame, so it's just 1x4 trim around it, like a standard picture frame on the top level. But if you look at the Euclid elevation, you'll see at levels 2 and 1, you'll see that more craftsman style 2-inch 2x2 head trim above the head trim. There's just an extra piece of trim, so it looks a little different.
Okay. Yeah, I think we would, I appreciate you trying to influence some variety into the composition of the project. I think throughout we probably want to see more traditional architectural details that we see in these neighborhoods, and with respect to the varying, or the style that you'd like to use of the 4 square and the craftsman style, with an expressed sill and casings around, versus a picture frame. Typically, we don't like to do that in the historic districts. And that's a fairly simple thing. But the other thing is you mentioned that you were trying to mimic previous 3/2 windows. What did you mean by that?
The 3/2 muntins within the top sash. The original building that was on the corner had the same type of style window. So that's why you see what we have there versus, the 2/2 muntins.
Oh, so you mean, I got you. So you mean 3 wide, 2 tall.
Yeah, 3 wide over. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. I got you. Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Commissioner Barth. Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation. I just have 2 questions. I wanted to just follow up with Michelle's question and make sure I understood. The side yard setback from the building to its property line, you're saying is a little over 1 foot?
Correct.
Okay, and you're also stating that that was the setback from the previous property?
Close to it. That was basically 18 feet from back of curb to the property line. I don't have the exact numbers right now from the previous building, but it is drastically closer to the sidewalk than the building behind it. So it was definitely not 31 feet to the side of the original historic building.
Yeah, right. I'm just asking the building's 1 foot to its property line, and
Correct.
the previous building was about 1 foot to the property line as well.
Correct.
All right, and then the other question I had is I just needed a little more clarity on the foundation, the height of the foundation from the front of the building, and how that relates to the previous 2 buildings that were on that lot, or buildings within the area. That foundation had me confused a little.
So the original buildings had a few steps up to the front door along East Boulevard. So we are trying to mimic that as best as possible as we finalize grading as we move forward. The rear of the property will be, very close to grade, but as grade slopes down towards East Boulevard, we will have a higher floor line from the sidewalk. So at East Boulevard, you will see the same amount or close to the same amount of stairs up to the first floor. So there will be a variation along Euclid Avenue. As you go north towards the property behind the building, it will be closer to grade. And as you get towards East Boulevard, you will see more of a step up to the first floor, which is indicative of what was there historically.
Yeah, just for me, when I look at what I've seen of all the drawings that are done, is the foundation on East Boulevard does seem lower than what I've seen as the foundations of the properties that were on that site, for sure.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Walker. Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Heineman.
Hi, John. Commissioner Walker, I think, got to touch on my primary question, which is the foundation line question. And I think this is best visible, Christy, in the Zoutwell surveys for both East Boulevard and Euclid Avenue, if we zoom out a little bit, but we may also need to reference Google Street View for this. All up and down East Boulevard and all up and down Euclid Avenue in this context, we have a street room that's defined by often a rolled concrete curb at the sidewalk or a very low site wall at the sidewalk. And there's typically between 2 and 5 steps right at the sidewalk. And so the grade that we're looking at on these sites on this side of East Boulevard and on both sides of Euclid Avenue is elevated from the sidewalk and creates sort of that semi-private transition in the street room. And then the porches have another 2 to 5 steps in them. We've got this kind of tiered situation that's creating the street room. So I have some concern about the foundation height, which of course is going to relate to the overall height of the project, because of, I think this particular piece of the context is a defining element. This front yard, the rolled curb, the couple of steps at the sidewalk, and then the couple of steps at the porch. And I think that's really why we're seeing the finished floor elevations along East Boulevard and along Euclid in all of the Zoutwell surveys and riding up and down both streets as feeling a little bit more elevated. And I think once we coordinate that into this project, because I think it really is a defining characteristic of this block in both directions, it's really going to push the whole project up a couple of feet. That's my primary note. I think that Commissioner Rumsch and Commissioner Carson, Commissioner Bonaparte and Walker hit on some of my other questions. One of my only other notes is I don't know that we're going to get to doors and windows in deliberation or not, but I think it would be really critical that the proportion of the panes throughout the project relate to each other. And we're looking at some pane proportions. This is kind of digging into the weeds in some of the doors and side lights that are more horizontal in nature. Whereas I think the sort of the primary language of the project is a vertically oriented, pane or STDL in this case. And so I think that will come up. My question about the setback, I think you have a lot more experience in multifamily than I do, and I know you've probably been through a lot of those meetings already. My experience with these corner lots is in chapter 12 of the city ordinance, where the side setback is half the front setback, wherever it's taken from. So based on the site plan, I would have expected it to be 22 from curb. That's everything I've got.
Okay, yeah, I've looked at this and another project in Wilmore Historic District that I'll most likely be presenting on next month. But I think it varies when I contact the zoning board from site to site. It really depends on this lot, and what we got here was 18 feet from back of curb to property line with no setback, because it is a side setback since it's facing East Boulevard. So that's what we really went with.
Okay.
I apologize. I don't have a better answer than that right now.
John, well, we have another question from Commissioner Barth.
Not necessarily a question, more of a comment. I'm sure we'll get into it more in deliberation. John, you can feel free to respond. But the one thing, and it's sort of a trend that I'm seeing with these multifamily projects, not necessarily lately, but in modern times is, and I have no doubt that you're getting pressure to meet certain program requirements. But I think there really becomes an issue with trying to meet height requirements, but also get the program in there where you're trying to fit 4 floors inside a certain height to make get as much living space as you can. But it really, especially here on East Boulevard, where we have these Queen Anne and 4 square houses with taller floor plates, it really messes up the vertical rhythm as you move down that street when everything seems to be, scrunched down, for lack of a better term. So, I don't know how you do it. I don't know if there are any, other structural or architectural maneuvers that you can do to sort of lessen that effect. But, this goes back to one of the first comments that Damon brought up is having that 4th floor in there and trying to squeeze that in that height requirement.
Understood.
Thank you, Commissioner Barth. That was helpful.
Thank you.
John, before we close for deliberation, you've heard questions and comments from not only the board, but also neighbors. Have anything you want to say before we close that speaks directly to the guidelines?
I would say that, as the design team, working with the property owner, we care about this site. I myself live in Dilworth, and I care about the HTC requirements as well. And we look forward to continue working through this and resolving this. Obviously, there's some challenges with regards to design and massing and scale, but we look forward to minimizing that impact, all the while creating a product that people are excited to live in and that helps the streetscape along East Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So now we'll close for deliberation. Commissioners, who wants to start? Commissioner Rumsch.
I'd just like to do an overview, and Barth made a comment that I thought really rang true, and that was the vertical rhythm of the Euclid Avenue elevation is so important, and that's, I think, the biggest conflict for this building. This is the entry. Dilworth is made up of 2 sections. One is the older, larger homes, which is the side of the East Boulevard that we're looking at, and the other is a little smaller. This is the entrance to that part of the neighborhood. And for it to disregard the kind of architecture that you're being introduced to on Euclid, we would not live up to our responsibility not to protect that. I've got some notes as we go through.
Why don't you get us started, Damon? You've already started. Why don't you continue?
Okay, so the first thing I think was agreed on in general was to eliminate the fourth floor. And in conjunction with that was the foundation height that needs to raise up from the street, from the sidewalk. And it sounded like it needed to come up two to 5 steps from the sidewalk, and then 2 to 5 steps from the yard into the house. So that's about 3 to 4 feet higher than the sidewalk to the floor level of the first story. So the height issue, I think, is dealt with those two issues: the fourth floor and the foundation height. The increased setback on Euclid Avenue, I think, is an issue. If it does not need to go back to the 30 feet that's on the front yards of the houses behind it, it at least needs to recede back to that setback, I think. Now, there may be some disagreement about that within the commission, but right now we're at 18 feet. The house behind it on Euclid is 30 feet, and that's pretty consistent as you go down the street. The traditional detail, the building needs to be, I think, in keeping with the traditional architectural details, which would include window trim, mullions, roof detail, balconies. And it looks like, because of the architecture of the building, it should pretty much stay true to the 4-square architecture that it's expressing. I personally think that each one of the units needs to have a front door facing Euclid, which is the connection from the residence to the street, and that layering that's so important between the house and the street. By doing that, it will also help reduce the massing on Euclid Avenue. And I think those are the points that I noted.
All right. Do we have additional points that we want to add to that list? Commissioners? Commissioner Heineman?
I think, and I'm going to let Commissioner Barth correct me if I've misunderstood him, but I think he also brought up the cornice line along East Boulevard, having a strong second level cornice line. You know, I'm going back and forth about this one thing, not to jump to another point, but we're talking about this is sort of inspired by a 4-square, which I think is a great precedent, and I think is true because it does have this square directional expression. I think that the trick at play, right, is that it's a 9-square, and in some ways that's really quite clever, right? Because it's taking a language that feels very familiar and a rhythm that feels very familiar in the neighborhood to accommodate the pressures of the development. And so I keep going back and forth on that. Like, can I call it a 4-square? It's a 9-square. But I think that's sort of a clever strategy that does actually effectively play on the language and the context. But what it does is it eliminates that strong second level cornice line that we see all up and down East Boulevard, which really is our physical reading of height as a pedestrian in the street room. And so I think it's negotiated by these porches on East Boulevard. We're looking at slide 14 here. And there really is this tradition in the 4 squares where that center tower does kind of come higher than the porches. So we've got it here. But if you switch to the Euclid elevation, it's a 3-story wall now. We no longer have that strong second level cornice line. That is, again, cleverly negotiated on the East Boulevard elevation with, you know, the depth and the shadow lines in the elevation and those porches and the elevation in the center tower. So, so again, I think it's cleverly negotiated along East Boulevard. I think it's Euclid that becomes that I struggle with more.
So Jessica, can I just ask you a point on that? The railing that's on the outside of the columns, are you in favor of that because it creates that heaviness for the cornice that you're speaking of, or is that included in what you're talking about?
I mean, I may be in the minority on this. I think that's sort of a contemporary take on a historic pattern. And so that's actually not the piece that feels out of context to me. It's definitely a different detail. I agree that it's a different detail. But that for me, when I'm looking at sort of the big picture context questions, that doesn't jump out at me, but I might be in the minority on that. I don't know.
Well, then what I am going to do is actually kick it over to Commissioner Barth to just kind of tag in where you left off. Commissioner Barth, have anything to add? Jessica kind of took your point about the vertical rhythm and talked about the cornice lines. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jessica that the East Boulevard elevation is more successfully handled. I don't know that I can say for sure whether I'm still okay with, or that I am okay with essentially a full 3-story building on that elevation. The only thing I can say is just it's more successful there, but I can't say yes or no. I would typically opt to go for a 2.5 on all of these sides of this building. What am I trying to say? Let's see. I mean, I don't think I have anything else to add.
Okay, I'm just going to point out a part of the preamble of new construction 6.1, and that was also included in staff's notes to us. And it talks about how zoning allows pretty much larger multifamily or commercial buildings at the edge of the historic district. But it goes on to talk about how the building should be respecting the context of the street. And I think that that's why Euclid is a little more challenging, because it doesn't step down, it steps up. And that becomes a little problematic for the context of that street, as you heard the neighbors say. And also because what they do on East Boulevard in breaking up the massing some is not done on the Euclid side. So that's just something for us to think about. We pointed out a number of issues for the applicant to start thinking about before we even get into the details. So we have a couple of other commissioners who want to speak up, but let's start thinking about how we want to craft a motion. Commissioner Lineberger.
Thank you. I think that one thing that we're struggling with on the East Boulevard elevation, and I really struggled with this in my review, is that I think it would be really helpful to see the building that's right next door, both in elevation as a part of that elevation. I know we see it on the Zoutwell survey and on the streetscape. I know we see it there, but we don't see the details of that building. We just see its form. But also the site plan. I was looking for it on the site plan as well, and it's not there. So I think that is part of the struggle in looking at this rhythm. That would help us see that 3-story compared to that, compared to the existing, a little bit more clear. Just a comment, I think it would help on the drawing side to include that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lineberger. That should definitely show up in a motion. Commissioner Barth?
Thank you. One thing did occur to me when you were talking, and the staff actually points this out too, with regard to the massing and the roof form. The roof does seem a little shallow, and I think when you experience this building from the streetscape, you're not really going to catch any of the slope on that roof. And it seems like the applicant has generated some sort of 3D model or rendering, and it might be good to see this building actually from the first person's perspective down at grade level. Because, you know, I do think that roof is a little shallow and the overall, oh, there you go. Yeah, so you don't really see the roof of that. So the massing of this just becomes a huge box. So, you know, other projects have adopted certain features like flat roofs or parapet walls to help alleviate that. And I think that might be worth exploring.
Thank you, Commissioner Barth. All right, Commissioner Henningsen.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Again, you know, for our feedback and for our, you know, motion, where possible, we need to be as specific as possible. So Damon, you had mentioned on Euclid, you know, it's important to have entrances to those units on Euclid, right? This is something that you had brought up 3 times in a row at a previous multifamily. So again, I just want the applicant to understand we're not, you know, it's not, we would like for you to see, please, in your next drawing, we want to see entrances to the units on Euclid. So I just want to make sure we're very specific about those things in our motion. Also, you know, when we think about some of the single family homes, like garages as an example, on corner units, what comes up time and time again is show me, and Commissioner Lindberger mentioned this, show me a site plan of the house behind it or beside it so that we can see, is that garage going to read as it's in the front yard of the adjacent house, right? And I think the same thing applies here for the house on Euclid that's behind this. So again, going back to what Nichelle was saying about distance from the thermal wall to the street and how it's, you know, it's not the 30 feet, it's 18 feet, right? So again, if we're thinking that that setback on the Euclid side is, you know, a non-starter the way it is written now, then let's be very prescriptive in that motion that says, come back at 30 feet, or show me a 3D model that includes the house behind me. Again, a couple of comments. I just want to make sure that the applicant knows specifically what we're saying for a couple of these big rock items, so we don't hash it out again on the next one.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Commissioner Henningsen. Yes, Commissioner Goodwin.
Yeah, I'm wondering if some additional clarification needs to be added with regard to the elimination of the 4th level. I'm wondering if to maximize square footage, I can see the first approach might be to make this structure a 3.5-story structure. But I've heard a couple of mentions of 2.5 stories. So I think maybe some clarification, is a 3.5-story structure acceptable to us, or does it need to be reduced to a 2.5-story?
Okay. All right. Okay. Duly noted. And I think our Commissioner Rumsch has been feverishly taking notes. So do you want to?
I would like to discuss that.
Okay.
I would love to see it only 2.5-story. So, but we're also, the question for me is can the commission say you need to limit it to 2.5-story? So
that sounds like
you, Phil, are we as a commission able to say it needs to be 2.5-story?
our purview, I believe, is height, not I don't think we cannot design it for that.
So the way that the commission has approached this in the past is to the point that Commissioner Heineman usually makes, is the functionality of these Zotwall surveys and the alignment of the cornices, the alignment of the ridge, the alignment of the windows and doors, and how the scale and massing and the relationship of the individual parts of the building itself will ultimately inform the stories and how many stories will fit. It's not up to you to tell how many stories. I mean, you can obviously say the 4th story just doesn't work, period. But height, along with all these other things, should play out and
I got it.
Then the applicant can figure it all out from there, right? Thanks.
Do you want to try going through one more time your list? We've all been taking notes, I believe, and if there's any. Commissioner Heineman?
I'd love to respond to the same conversation because I think I posed it as a question before and it may have come out as a statement. I'm not 100% sure about the 3 stories either. And Commissioner Barth said that, and I kind of agree. I think that when we look at this exhibit on the one that's up, the slide that's up, what is that? On slide 18, which is the Zoutwell, if we look at the entire block, there's a really strong second story cornice line between 20 and 25 feet. And on this project, we're looking at the 3rd story cornice line around 27, 28. And so I think that, you know, a lot's going to happen when we correct the foundation. I think that that will have a domino effect through the project. And it's hard to know how we're going to feel about 3 stories or 2.5 stories without seeing the foundation coordination. That being said, there are no 3-story buildings on this street in this area, aside from, you know, the ones that are not relevant, the Inlivian building or whatever. And the one on Winthrop and Euclid is very cleverly broken down as a 2.5, even though it's really a 3-story building.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do is break it into the 2 elevations. This is the East Boulevard and the Euclid. And so first of all, on the East Boulevard side, I think as a commission, we feel the 4th floor, the 4th story needs to be eliminated. And starting from the foundation height needs to come up to adjacent building floor heights, which is approximately 5 feet from the sidewalk. I mean, yeah, which will allow around 6 or 7 steps up. The elements of the adjacent buildings, the floor heights, the roof lines, and the cornices need to be respected from the adjacent buildings. And I think that really takes care of the East Boulevard elevation. Is that right? Does anybody have anything else to add for East Boulevard?
I think it's really important that the foundation be split between the curb and the porch,
Okay.
like the context is with that.
So about 2.5 feet up from the sidewalk and then another 2.5 feet up from the yard.
I don't want to get prescribed the amount up from the
Well,
yard.
that's why I
but
said the 5
yeah,
feet. Because
you're right. This Zoutwell survey calls out the sidewalk and the finished floor on every building. And so I think the way you called out the sidewalk to finished floor is great. I just don't think I want to prescribe the split between the 2. I just want to say that there needs to be a split between the 2 that is contextual.
between the sidewalk and the floor.
Yeah, that there's just up and down the street, there's the rolled concrete curbs or the very, very, very low walls at the sidewalk that have 2 to 4 or 5 steps at the sidewalk.
So
So it's like that foundation is split and the yards are barely elevated, creating that like semi-private
So call it
street room.
a split rise.
Why don't we say something that's a little more general, like
Here's what I would say.
respecting the rhythm of the foundation?
Chapter 8 and steps at the sidewalk plane. Chapter 8, the landscaping chapter addresses the steps at the sidewalk plane. I'll get you a specific.
So, and just suggest landscape steps.
I'll find it for you. You can move on to something else. I'll come back.
Okay.
And there's one more thing, and I'll kick it over to Commissioner Lineberger because she brought up seeing the neighboring building on
So
East
I was gonna
Boulevard.
put that as a separate thing. So
Okay,
let me,
why don't we open it
Okay,
for
okay.
Commissioner Lineberger because she has something she wants to say. Commissioner Lineberger?
I just wanted to ask if we need to add anything about tree save. We didn't really discuss the trees at all, but there was some mention in the presentation about, you know, that there was a arborist involved and you know, some tree assessment going on. And it doesn't seem like, I know most of the trees seem to be city trees and in the right of way.
Christy, when I was there, I don't think there were any trees on the lot
There-
itself.
I can provide some context. The commission saw a case last fall about unauthorized tree removal at the site. and the commission required replanting by that current owner,
Oh.
or if the property is being developed, replanting to be as part of the new development. And I think it's just a little early to talk about trees and materials and details when you haven't settled on height, massing, scale. But this brief plug can serve as a reminder to the applicant that there is a true replanting requirement that the commission has already mandated for this lot.
And I'll put that into the motion as part of a site.
Great, thank you, Christy.
So anything else on the front? So let me back up. I said East Boulevard was one, Euclid was one. I also have one as general. So that's, we probably need a block site plan to show the setbacks for the different buildings that are there. So we can get a reference for the new building. So a block site plan showing the buildings, an East Boulevard elevation of buildings, three buildings to the left and maybe 3 buildings to the right.
That sounds great.
And that'll give us an elevation of height and cornice and floor and yard elevations.
Yep.
And then, of course, a site plan showing the planting of the trees.
Damon, you mentioned several times, made mention of the porch, of the balcony. In a restudy of it, you said it felt a little heavy.
Well, I think 2 other commissioners kind of didn't agree with that. I think they were more comfortable with that. I mean, I still feel it's kind of awkward, but I was the only one that felt that way, so I didn't include it in what I was reporting.
You're not alone.
Okay. So just a restudy of the front porches, and that may happen anyway, because once we start looking at
With
the
everything
plan,
else, yeah.
So restudy front porch. I'll just put front porch details. Is that?
Oh, balcony, yeah.
And I think that's everything for East Boulevard. Euclid, I want to be specific, but I don't know how to do that without saying it needs to be this setback or that. I think the Euclid really needs a lot of study. It needs to study massing. It needs to study setback.
I think a restudy of those things that covers it.
Massing. Setback.
The setback.
I'll just put in
6.2.
respect to
6.2, number 1,
6.2.
number 2.
And then the visible entrances to the units be visible from Euclid. So there's a connection between the street and the building.
Mhm.
Is there anything else on Euclid? I think there's a lot of work to be done on Euclid.
I think, Damon, we can go through all of 6, and 6.2 talks about the setbacks. 6.5 talks about the massing and complexity of form. 6.6, height and width. 6.7, scale.
Okay.
6.9, foundations.
And that I can refer to that back up on East Boulevard too.
6.10, roof form and materials.
Okay.
Cornices and trim are 6.11.
And that's referring back to other.
The rhythm. 6.12, doors and windows. And so, we did talk about the porch, 6.14, but materials,
And we haven't even. really
yeah, we
started
haven't done
talking about
that. So we can say that we have not studied those things.
Okay, let me read this once.
Commissioner Heineman has something she wants. Commissioner Heineman and then Commissioner Lineberger and the card behind that one.
Damon, I'll add 8.4 to your list. That's the front yard.
Okay, that's for East Boulevard.
Yeah.
8 point. This is for the steps, right?
8.4. You can add it to your foundation notes, which is
yeah.
foundation
6.9.
is 6.9.
6.9 and
Mhm.
8.4.
Correct.
Commissioner Lineberger?
I just wanted to add, this goes back to drawings. I think that porch, I did agree with you, Damon, on your porch detail comment, that rail and that condition, that relationship with the columns. But the detail, I think, needs to show that relationship a little bit further. So I don't know if it's part of the motion or if it's just a comment for the applicant, that I think it would be good to show that detail as part of the balcony rail detail and not
Okay.
just the rail itself.
Friendly amendment accepted?
Got it.
Got it. Commissioner Walker?
Thanks. I think going back to PJ's advice, would it be worth our considering being more prescriptive about the side yard setback, whether it be half from the curb
So
that
let's talk about
that it
that.
is in the front as it should be on the side, or something more specific, rather than just revisiting, telling the applicant to revisit?
So let's talk about that as a commission. Is that okay? Would you, Christy, would you put up something that'll show us a setback with the build? Yeah. So, okay, so I'll start this by just saying what I think should happen is that front piece that's big on the front, that 2 units should stay like it is. And then that whole back piece should step back to reflect the setback of the buildings behind it. So that should step back to 31 feet, whereas the front unit could stay at the 18 feet. Now, it could also, I think by stepping it back gradually, I think that's awkward. So I think it should, the whole back half of that building should respect that setback after you leave East Boulevard. What do you think?
Commissioner Heineman?
I respectfully disagree. Like I do. I mean, like I think that the length of the building along Euclid is contributing to sort of our heartache about the setback. But I think that the way we experience these corners along East Boulevard is that the buildings anchor the corners close to the sidewalk. It's just that we don't have many buildings that are this long.
Right. Well,
And so I think it's a combination. It's like it's a both and. And so, if I'm on Google Street View over here, and I've got this, little street on the building across the street, across Euclid, the one that Christy is motioning to right now. I've got a really short little wall along the sidewalk, and then I've got, about 5 feet of planting. I don't know the exact dimension, but it's about 5 feet of planting. It's about the size of the sidewalk. And then the building wall is literally a 2-story straight wall going down the road, but it still feels very comfortable because all of those corners are anchored close to the sidewalks, but those buildings just aren't that long. And so I don't know that we need to be prescriptive about the solution. I mean, if I'm taking, the 8 and 6 and the 18, it's probably pretty close. It's just that we're missing some of this articulation with the elevation off of the sidewalk and the break and those, the variations in the steps. And it's the length of the building that I think is contributing to the heartache over the setback.
So then the question is, where do you start? Where do you make that distinction? Where do you cut it off? You can't, so if you don't do it at the front and you go another, does it step back a little bit and go and then step back a little, or actually do you have an archway or some kind of breezeway between the buildings and it gives you some airspace? But right now there's no airspace. There's no breath between along the building itself. And so that's why I started at the most extreme. I didn't think you guys were gonna say that, but
we often say it's a holistic approach. And so it's kind of like the hip bone connected to the thigh bone. Like once they start moving, playing with the foundation, and then they start lowering the height, it just feels, for me, it would feel weird to be so prescriptive when there's so many other things that could affect that look.
Christy, would you show the elevation on Euclid? Okay, so that's a solid wall with 2 bump outs. So we're pretty all in agreement that there needs to be some relief, some space between the buildings, some recess back in. It can't be just all
wall.
frontage against.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Lineberger.
I really agree with what you just said, Kim, and also what Jessica just, her comments. You know, when I go back and look at what was there, and I look at other Foursquare type buildings on corners, they have a tighter setback on the side street, and what was there, it's really holding the line of what was there. And I agree totally with what Jessica said. It's what's giving us pause is the length of the building. You know, it's not a Foursquare. But I think we can, just like you said, Kim, I just don't think we can be that prescriptive.
So if you, okay, so there are 3 buildings there. What if they took the one center building and just moved it back 2 feet? Is that enough?
I think, we don't design it for them, but
No, but I'm trying,
yeah.
if we're gonna get more like, this is more what we want, I don't know how prescriptive do we want? Because if it's just gonna be some massing and scaling, they could come back and just say, we move things in and out and you're ready to go. But really what we're looking for is some breathing room between the buildings, right? I mean, if you go down some of those larger buildings that we looked at, the multifamily buildings, you'll have a building and then there'll be an entrance into the parking to the back right there between the buildings, and then there'll be a building and then there'll be another space. So there's some airspace there. There's some separation. There's
Right.
not a continuous.
It breaks up the
out.
wall. It breaks up.
And so just moving one of the, and so my point was,
Mhm.
you can't just move a building 2 feet in or 1 foot in and accomplish what we're looking for.
Mm-mm.
But I don't know how to say that without being.
If I'm interpreting what you're saying and what the rest of us are discussing, it feels like the setback on the 3rd building on slide 17 on Euclid Avenue is what's problematic.
So the rear buildings. So
The 3rd one.
Okay.
I think that's what I'm hearing us saying. I don't know.
I think it's the overall composition of the building. It, to your point, is a long wall right now, and I'm sure that they think that John and his team have done some scale reducing techniques, but it hasn't gone far enough. And so it's going to be, I think, very difficult for us to be prescriptive about it because so many other things need to be changed. But let's bring in PJ to kind of elaborate on what he was talking about earlier. PJ. Commissioner Henningsen.
Sorry. So what I don't want to happen with the conversation with setback and Euclid is for us to say, do a restudy on the setback and then next meeting go, no, we're not going to consider, the setback as it is written. You need to pull it in so it's adjacent to the house behind us, right? I want to avoid that. But I think what I'm hearing is, by using, changes to massing and scale and some of the other, some of the other guidelines and stuff, taking that into account, we are open to something, we are open to some, I don't want to say an exception, but we are open. We don't have a hard and fast setback rule, right? It depends on what the architect comes back with. I just.
Right, but because PJ, they are, to John's point, they're honoring the setback of the previous building. It just felt less overbearing because the side was not that long as it is now. And so with that being said, if a lot of these other things change that we've gone through, most of chapter 6, then hopefully that will affect the Euclid Avenue setback side as well.
What comes to mind is it seems to me that in the past, when we've had a building this long, that there's a driveway in the center that goes to the middle courtyard that could flow one way through and to the back. So, I mean, I think, would it be fair to say that this building should read as two separate buildings?
They have options, I think. They have options, and they're the ones who I think should be
Okay.
coming up with those solutions.
I have a question. How do we feel about the left side elevation? Because we've talked solely about Euclid and all we've got on the other side is a mirror of what we're telling them we don't like. And it's going to be, it's within 10 feet of the property line. And
Christy, would you show that one? Show the left side.
You also don't have courtyard elevations.
correct.
And there's no site, and we may have a site plan, but it's not very, doesn't show the other building next to it. Okay, we'll probably get that with the, so really Euclid Avenue and the left side elevations really are gonna, although we're not gonna be as prescriptive or as, we're gonna be more forgiving on this elevation.
I think what you're saying on the Euclid side could be applied to the left,
Okay.
to this side.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I think I've got the East Boulevard good. So left elevation and Euclid elevation, a study on the setback and the massing, a restudy of the massing, the setbacks, the doors and windows, roofing, scale, height, as in chapter 6. That will take care of the.
Commissioner Heineman?
I think I just want to go on record as saying I'm going to be more open to the walls along the interior lot line elevation and the alley elevation. Just, I don't want to, from my perspective, I'm going to be more open to that, and I don't want to mislead the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Heineman.
So, are there doors on the, are there
Damon,
doors on that elevation?
Yes, and my question is also, but I don't,
How do they
I mean,
work?
the applicant is definitely more experienced in this than I am. This is a lot of glazing against a property line too, for a multifamily application to meet the fire code.
Yeah, fire.
So I don't know how this elevation plays out, but I don't have the expertise to be sure about
And
that.
so how do those, there's got to be a connection. That's got to come from the site plan.
I'll stop you there though. If your approval is not contingent on that, you approve what you approve. If he gets into permitting and can't build what you've
Then he
approved,
comes back.
they'll come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you do have front doors of these apartments facing side, very tight side yards. So I think the site plan will probably help us. Site plan that shows adjacent buildings. Do we have that?
Yeah, and because we're outside of going and visiting the site, we don't really have context. And context is very important for us to make a decision.
All right, should I read this one more time and?
With feeling.
Okay.
Making an official motion this time?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Great.
I move, to continue this, application, for the following, changes. On the East Boulevard elevation, to eliminate the fourth floor, and for the building to respect the adjacent heights of foundation level, cornice level, roof level, of the adjacent buildings. And I think and that includes the steps from the front yard to the street and from the yard to the floor. That's from chapter 6.9, chapter 6.3, and chapter 8.4. Okay, then. A restudy of the front porch details, especially the details around the balcony railing, roofing, and columns. I think that takes care of the East Boulevard side. In general, we need a block site plan showing the new building and the adjacent setbacks of the building and positions of the buildings around it. We need an elevation of East Boulevard, 3 buildings to the right and 3 buildings to the left for context. We need dimensions on that site, on the block site plan from the thermal wall to the street of the different buildings. And with the site plan, we also need to see a tree planting. As that was as recommended for the last, from a previous application.
Yeah.
I think that takes care of the general. And then finally, the Euclid Avenue. We need a restudy of the massing, the setback, the roof lines, the scale, and height, as in chapter 6, number 1, 2, 5, 6, 10, and 12, and 7. I think that's everything. Does that cover everything?
That's everything I had on my list. Commissioner Walker wants to say something.
Yeah, I think you also wanted the applicant to revisit the articulation or absence of said on the back side of the building.
Oh, I don't even remember talking about the backside. So
You can just say, you haven't discussed the backside of the building or any of the
so
other architectural details.
other architecturals will be reviewed according to the changes that have been asked for. That should take care of that, I think. Also, one last thing on the Euclid side, we do want a connection between the front door and the sidewalk.
Okay, so we've heard Commissioner Rumsch's motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hayden. Any further discussion of the motion? Commissioners? Okay, let's vote. Commissioner Heineman,
Yes.
Commissioner Goodwin,
Yes.
Commissioner Hayden,
Yes.
Commissioner Rumsch,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonaparte,
Yes.
Commissioner Lineberger,
Yes.
Commissioner Barth,
Yes.
Commissioner Henningsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Parati, yes. Motion to continue passes 9.
I'm very sorry, you forgot Commissioner Walker.
Commissioner Walker. You're not on my sheet, Commissioner Walker. I apologize. Commissioner Walker. Commissioner Walker.
Yes, apologize, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker, yes. Motion passes with all commissioners present, 10-0. Okay. So we are going to take a 10-minute break and let the record show that I'll be recusing from the second application. Commissioner Henningsen will step in as chair for that. And let the record also show that I am now leaving the meeting at 3:05. Thank you.
Hey, Christy, I'm ready whenever you guys are.
Hi, PJ. We're
Hi.
back. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm
Okay, awesome.
ready to rock and roll.
Okay,
My
great.
my only question is, we'll figure it out along the way, but once we get to questions and stuff for the other commissioners, I'm just not able to see that.
I know.
No, but that's okay. We'll figure that out. I'll look at the people
We'll
who
let
have their hands raised, and maybe if Candace or somebody could chat with me, maybe as well. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
We have chat disabled because of being quasi judicial, but what I'm glad to do is kind of be your eyes and ears and let you know who in the meeting room wants to talk or if someone has their hand up.
Okay.
All right. With that, I believe Jennifer, are you with us? I think Jennifer was
I'm
sitting.
here. Sorry, it wasn't letting me
No,
unmute.
it's okay. And you sat through the whole first case, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did. And Scott is here with me, and we were both
Okay,
sworn in at the
Scott.
beginning.
And have you both been sworn in?
Yes,
Scott too?
yes, he was here
Okay.
beside me.
Okay. It looks like we have one commissioner that is not back yet. Joel Walker, are you back? No. We have, in the meantime, I'm going to note for the record that Kim Parati has left the meeting. PJ Henningsen, our vice chair, will be acting in capacity of chair. We are looking for Jill. I see Jill. Jill's back. Okay, we're ready to get started. The next application is 1913 Cleveland Avenue. This is a resubmission of a previously denied project. Just want to make sure no one thinks this is a continuance. It is a new application. And the proposal is the construction of a multifamily building. It's approximately 40 feet in height, 44 feet in height from grade. The building has a lot more design and broken down of massing along the left elevation and the front elevation. I would just like to, remind the applicants and anyone here to speak for or against this project that the commissioners have done their due diligence. They've visited the site, they've read the project. Jennifer, if you can focus your comments to the guidelines and things under HDC's purview, and limit any other discussion. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk through the project, and then we'll start with neighbors who wish to speak. Jennifer?
Christy, real quick, has Jennifer been sworn in?
Yep, both Jennifer and Scott have been sworn in. They've been for the whole meeting.
Can we
So,
go back to
Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can we go back to the existing conditions slide at the beginning and start there? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are presenting our design for a 3-story, 40-unit affordable housing apartment building on the lot we own at 1913 Cleveland Avenue. I'd like to start by highlighting some key points about our lot and its context within the Dilworth Historic District. Our lot is 50 feet wide by 200 feet deep, and we have a 10-foot wide common use alleyway running adjacent to the left side. Next slide, please. Our lot sits on both the southern and western edges of the Dilworth Historic District. The lots across the street from our lots are not in the Historic District. Our project will not face any historic properties or any lots in the Historic District. We are located next door to the Tremont, a large multifamily property also in the Dilworth Historic District that was previously approved by the Historic District Commission. The Tremont is the gateway to an area of dense 3- and 4-story multifamily development. The red X's you see on this slide show all of the 3- and 4-story buildings located in our block and the block to the south of ours. Next slide, please. Our location is a transitional location between Dilworth and South End, an area that is quickly becoming a very dense urban area. Lowe's has recently completed a 23-story tower several blocks away, and another 23-story tower is slated to be developed on a block closer. Next slide, please. This slide shows additional details and photos of our surroundings. Looking across the street, there are 2 parcels at 1920 Cleveland and 231 Tremont that are now zoned TOD-UC. These parcels can now be redeveloped with buildings up to 120 feet in height. These properties are not in the historic district. Also across the street and not in the historic district is 216 East Worthington, which is currently approved for a 6-story hotel, but has recently applied for a non-conditional TOD&C rezoning. Adjacent to the alleyway that runs to the north of our property are an empty lot at 300 East Worthington and commercial properties at 304 and 308 East Worthington. The 300 East Worthington lot has an HDC approved plan for a 2-story plus basement single-family home. All of the properties in our block to the south of our lot are multifamily developments, all approved by the Historic District Commission. This includes Dilworth Court Townhomes, Dilworth Terrace condos, and the Tremont condos. All 3 of these developments have at least 3 stories, plus have an additional story of basement foundation and garage space. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to share more details of our planned development. Our building will consist of 3 stories plus a basement level. The building will contain 40 micro-sized studio units, all of which will be affordable to households making 80% or less of area median income. Each of the 40 units will be between 300 and 350 square feet. Next slide, please. The next 4 slides show our elevation renderings. As you can see, the building will have a full brick exterior with a red tumbled brick. There will be cast stone window and door headers and windowsills. There will also be a cast stone decorative band between the basement level and the first floor. Roof overhangs are oversized, and there will be decorative wood cornice and wood trim. Windows will be aluminum clad in a 4 light over 1 light pattern. Doors will be 1 light and will also be aluminum clad. If we can move to the site plan slide. Thank you. Due to the topography of our site, which falls approximately 10 feet from front to back, our building will have a basement foundation. As you can see from the top diagram, our basement level will include a small number of parking spaces. These are for building services, not for tenants. The basement will also house bike storage, 2 sets of stairs, an elevator, and an area for trash collection. If we can move several slides forward to the porch slide. Yeah, that one. Our building will have a full front porch, which will be 36.5 feet wide by 9 foot deep. The porch includes decorative full-height brick columns, full brick steps with cast stone caps, wood cornice and trim, and metal roof and railing. Next slide, please. Recognizing the visibility of our left side elevation, we have incorporated 6 side porches. There are 3 per floor. Each side porch is approximately 16 feet wide by 3 feet deep. There will be cast stone trim on the base of each porch and decorative metal railing, which will match the railing on the front porch. Porches are flanked by brick columns on each side, and decorative brickwork is included above the 2 top floor porches. All of these details have been designed to coordinate with our front elevation and front porch. Next slide, please. Consistent with historic multiplexes and apartments, as well as most modern-day apartment buildings, our building will have a flat parapet-style roof. All HVAC units will be placed on the roof. The middle of our front elevation features a substantial break in the roofline accentuated by brick bump outs. The left side of our building features a series of jogs and bump outs at the roofline and within the brick veneer. Next slide, please. The next slide shows examples of historic buildings in the Dilworth neighborhood that are all full brick rectangular style buildings. As you'll see, all but one of these features a flat roof. Whether a school, church, or commercial building, these buildings were built and still sit today adjacent to single-family historic homes. Next slide, please. The next slide shows 4 additional multifamily properties in the Dilworth neighborhood that are also all full brick rectangle block style buildings with flat roofs. Unfortunately, each of these beautiful examples of multifamily architecture from the 1920s were left out of the boundaries of the Dilworth Historic District when the lines were drawn. The Addison on Moorhead, a historic landmark, sits across the street from the Dilworth Historic District and is 9 stories in height. The other 3 buildings are on Kirkwood Avenue and back up to the Dilworth Historic District's Park Road boundary. This entire block is still intact from the 1920s and includes a beautiful mix of apartments, duplexes, and quadplexes, all backing up to single-family homes. Next slide, please. Dilworth, of course, isn't the only Charlotte Historic District to have historic examples of multifamily construction. This slide shows 3 examples of historic apartment buildings built in the 1920s in historic 4th Ward. The Frederick and Poplar apartment condominiums are both historic landmark, full brick, flat roof, block style buildings built in close proximity to single family homes. Though no longer standing, the Jefferson is another example from the 1920s of this style of architecture. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, our property naturally slopes downward from front to back 10 feet from street level to the rear of the lot. Both the Tremont and Dilworth Terrace, which sit adjacent to us, have basement foundations and garages. The adjacent historic properties along East Worthington, 304, 308, and 312, as well as the approved but not yet built plan at 300 East Worthington, all have basement foundations. Our foundation is consistent with our surroundings and required due to our topography. Next slide, please. This slide includes pictures illustrating the wide variety of directional expression and scale of our surrounding properties. At 44 feet tall from street level and a range of 36 to 40 feet wide, our building will have a vertical expression from Cleveland Avenue. This vertical expression will be balanced by the horizontal expression of the 36-foot wide front porch. Our large porch, abundance of windows, and wood and cast stone trim accents will all work together to reduce our building's scale. Next slide, please. This massing and complexity of form slide includes pictures illustrating the form of historic buildings in our surroundings. As this slide shows, the overall complexity of form of most of the surrounding historic buildings are simple or relatively simple in nature, just as we have designed the form of our building to be. Next slide, please. I would now like to share some details of the building dimensions and spacing and how they relate to our surroundings. I'll start with discussing the setback from Cleveland Avenue. Our TOD NC zoning requires a 16-foot minimum setback from back of curb, but we have designed our front porch to sit approximately 20 feet from the back of the curb in order to line up with the Tremont building located directly next door. This positioning is approximately 6.5 feet from our front lot line. Next slide, please. The next slide shows the relationship of the historic buildings in our surroundings to Cleveland Avenue. All 5 of these examples shown, 1804 Cleveland, 300 East, 1829 Cleveland, 229 East Worthington, and 300 East Tremont, sit on or very close to their Cleveland Avenue lot line. Next slide, please. Now moving on to building width. The front porch of our building is 36.5 feet wide. This building width is maintained for approximately 41 feet of our building's depth, which is approximately 61 feet from the back of the curb. Please note that there is a required 5-foot wide ADA ramp to the right of the building. This is not included in the width measurements since it is not part of the building's main structure. Next slide, please. Measured from framing, the width of the rear of the building is also approximately 36.5 feet. Between the front and the rear of the building, there are a series of jogs and openings. At its widest point, measured at framing, the building is approximately 40.5 feet wide. Next slide, please. This slide shows the widths of the historic properties in our surroundings. As you can see from these 5 examples, our new building's width range of 36.5 feet to 40.5 feet is consistent with the width of our historic surroundings. I'll also note that our current building is 40 feet wide for its entire depth. Therefore, the majority of our new building will actually allow for more spacing to both the alleyway and the Tremont than that of our current building. Next slide, please. This slide provides additional detail on spacing. Measured from framing, the distance from the right side of the building to the right lot line is 6 feet. This is consistent with the spacing between the Tremont and this same lot line, other than at the Tremont stairwell, which was built on top of the lot line. The distance from the left side of the building to the alleyway ranges from 7.5 feet at the front of the building to 3.5 feet at the brick bump outs. Next slide, please. The next two slides show the spacing of historic structures along our alleyway and other alleyways that run between Tremont and Worthington Avenues. As you can see, these structures sit in very close proximity to the alleyways. Our spacing in relation to the alleyway is the same or greater than each of these examples. Next slide, please. Yeah. This slide provides detail on the height of our building and its relationship to Cleveland Avenue and other properties along Cleveland. The first floor of our building will sit approximately 6 feet above street level. 38 feet is the height of our first, second, and third floors, plus the roof parapet. Therefore, the peak of our building will sit approximately 44 feet above street level. Please note that one of the requirements of our TOD zoning is a 12-foot tall first floor. So that level has been designed taller than the second and third floors to meet that zoning requirement. 44 feet above street level puts us at an elevation of 775 feet. This slide shows how that compares to other properties along Cleveland Avenue. We would sit in line with the bottom of the tower of the Bonterra building at 1829 Cleveland. We would sit 11 feet lower than the top of the Tremont. Next slide, please. The left side of our lot is adjacent to an alleyway, which abuts the rear yards of 4 properties along Worthington Avenue. While Worthington Avenue is not our streetscape, we have been asked to show how our height compares with properties along this street. This slide shows these details. As you can see in these pictures, there are essentially no trees in the rear yards of these Worthington Avenue properties. There is already a wide open view from these properties to the left side of a multifamily building. Our building will only change this view to be of a different multifamily building, one with higher end exterior finishes and one that is 11 feet lower than the building currently in view. Going back to the details of this slide, you'll see red and green lines at the top of this slide. The red line shows the height of the Tremont, and the green line shows the height of the building we are proposing. We are seeking approval for a height which puts us at a peak elevation just over 4 feet higher than what was approved by the HDC for the single-family home at 300 East Worthington. This elevation for us, again, is 11 feet lower than what the Historic District Commission approved for the Tremont building that sits directly next door to us and with the same orientation to Cleveland Avenue. I would like to make sure that everyone understands the topography of both our lot and our block. The grade at the corner of Worthington Avenue and Cleveland Avenue is 20 feet higher than the rear of our lot. There is 10 feet of fall from this corner to the front of our lot, and then our lot falls 10 feet further back from front to back. Next slide, please. Our final slide details the building size in relationship to our lot. Overall, our lot coverage will be approximately 70%. Our 70% lot coverage includes both the front porch and the required ADA ramp, both of which are open air. Our 70% lot coverage does not include the large right-of-way in front of our lot, which will give additional green space to our site. As mentioned before, our front porch will start 6.5 feet from the front lot line, but this is a full 20 feet back from the curb. The 70% lot coverage also does not include the alleyway space that will always be open space for our site and surrounding lots. I'll close now with saying that our slides and presentation today have taken you through each of the Historic District Commission's new construction guidelines. We have shown you the details and dimensions related to each guideline and how each compares to our surroundings. We feel strongly that we have shown historic precedent for each design element and each dimension of our proposed building. We did not include brick and window samples or a landscaping plan in our package today, but we are happy to provide those details in our next meeting, consistent with the process we've seen with other recent multifamily approvals. We look forward to hearing your questions and feedback on our project, and thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, Christy, has anyone signed up to speak for or against this case?
Yes, we have a number of people signed up to speak. Ken Rayner, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Wait, I can. Ken, have you been sworn in?
I have. I listened to you folks from the beginning of the first presentation. So,
Okay, great. Well, if you would just state your name and your address for the court reporter, I'll let you get started with your comments.
thank you. Ken Rayner. I live at 229 East Worthington Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina, along with my wife, Lucy. Also, I do want to start off, I don't thank you folks enough for the service that you contribute your time to your efforts to preserve the historic district, both in not only Dilworth, but other neighborhoods. And it is important that you do that, because if you didn't, we would see the same thing that happened or happens in Elizabeth or Cherry with what I call the invasion of California homes, which, you can say you love that style, and that's great, but those California homes are really out of place in a historic neighborhood like Cherry or Elizabeth. My wife and I both oppose this project because we are afraid that if you allow this project, you are setting a precedent for basically the deterioration of the historic nature of the Dilworth community, because this building does not fit into the context of Dilworth. I do want to echo something that Chairperson Karate said about your duties, and I know you're familiar with them as it relates to commercial buildings on the fringe. I was talking to some of my neighbors, and there was an expression by folks that commercial buildings seem to, in the past, have gotten a free pass from the commission, that they were not held to the same standards that residential applications were held to. And so that made me wonder, is there an exception for commercial projects? And when I go to your guidelines, which I guess now are your standards, in the opening section under new construction, section 6, it says zoning along the edges of some areas of the historic district allows larger multifamily or commercial buildings to minimize their impact on neighboring historic dwellings. The HDC shall enforce the design guidelines through scale reducing techniques. Designing these structures to minimize their impacts on neighboring historic dwellings is a challenging exercise. Scale reducing techniques such as dividing the elevation elements into smaller bays, varying building planes, breaking up roof masses, using multiple materials, and taking clues from the nearby historic buildings are essential to reducing the negative impacts of these larger structures. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with that language. And folks, it's funny, I may be wrong, but I think the only historic building within a 360 range of this applicant's property is mine and Lucy's house across the street. And it's one of the last residential structures. It is the last residential structure on our block, I believe. This proposed building does not fit the mode of what I see as the typical residential structure up and down East Worthington. It doesn't even fit with the appearance of the Tremont, which the applicant uses the Tremont as a precedent, I guess. But remember, it was approved under earlier guidelines, as I understand it. But at least the Tremont tries to incorporate some of the historic nature of the structures in Dilworth. But this building, which is essentially a rectangular brick box, does not. It is interesting if you look at some of the other guidelines. There are guidelines for height and width, but not length. And I noticed in the earlier presentation, how length was playing a role into your perception of that application. And it does so because the same building at a certain height and width, if you expand the length of it, that expands the mass and the spacing of it. And that's what's happening with this building, particularly for people like me who own a lot that would be adjacent to this building. That mass of a structure, which is in our backyard, is 4 stories high. It's not 3 because that ground floor garage is right at our rear lot line. That's what we see. And it's interesting, people walking down Euclid toward Tremont, that's what they're going to see. And I know when we made the application for approval at 300 East Worthington, we heard some of the same comments I heard earlier today that this is the entrance to the historic district. This is the gateway, and care needs to be taken to preserve it. And so, we were asked at one point to come back and make sure we showed the detail to the rear of our building for the simple reason that, people walking up Euclid would see that. Well, the same way people walking down Cleveland, we're going to see the, I guess the left side of this building is going to be a pretty dramatic view, but particularly for the neighbors on Worthington who back right up to this. And I do want to make a point that is getting lost here, and I have to make a little disclaimer for the applicants. Nothing I say here today should be taken as my consent to them using the alleyway to service this building. But in the past, I've been a big advocate. I wanted people to use the alleyway. But the alleyway sits on the rear 10 feet of the property of every unit owner or lot owner on Worthington. So when they say this building is going to be 3.5 feet, and that's actually from the framing to the alleyway, that's really, this building is 3.5 feet plus the brick and the brick ties to my rear property line, as well as the rear property line of other neighbors who own property fronting Worthington. And that's part of the problem that I see with the spacing of this property. It uses, they say 70%. I can't do the math. It looks like to me it's more than 70% of their lot. But when you add the length to it, the width to it, and the height, it just, the spacing and the massing of it is dramatic when you compare what is on the other lots. In fact, you can see it in their presentation. If you go to the slide where they've labeled spacing, you can see how none of the other structures, including the current building that's located on their lot, including the house behind them, including all the houses and structures on Worthington, none of the structures take up 70% of the building, and that certainly goes to spacing in my mind, as well as massing. If you look at their structure, there's really no articulation in terms of elements and bays and materials. And, to show you how important that is, if you go to the properties that they gave as historic examples, for example, the ones that have the properties on Magnolia, Kirkwood, and Ideal Way, look at the difference in the articulation of those buildings and the bays and the porches. Compare that to the blank wall that is pretty much their elevation that faces Worthington. And by the way, as I understand it, under your guidelines, under the porch section of the guidelines, porches shall be, I think it was 8 feet. not the 3 feet that they're trying to use for the Juliet porches. I also would ask you to look at your guidelines on the materials that, and this is, I think, I can't get the number here, but it's, I think it's 6.13, guidelines for porches, footnote number 4, porches typically shall have a minimum depth of 8 feet. So when they're showing porches on the side of 3 feet, that's not consistent. And then I would also ask you to look at the examples of the porches that you have in your guidelines. Those are the type of porches that we see in Dilworth, not the structure that with these brick, brick columns and the this large bulkheads coming down to the street on the applicant's proposal. And so I think, the historic examples they give do show how porches and bays and the changes in articulation can make the property look more like in the context of Dilworth. It's funny, the use of the Addison building, which is the one on 831 East Moorhead that they show. What's important there is the Addison sets back from the street. Even though it's a taller building, the massing of it fits better on that lot. They also, on the slide before that, that's titled Roof and Building Form, Historic Examples within Dilworth. When you look at some of those properties, you see that the articulation, for example, the church that's the Bonterra restaurant, much different than their, just almost hard cornered porch. The Myrtle Square apartment, I guess they want to show, well, here's a brick wall, but what they forget, the Myrtle is actually wings that surround a beautiful courtyard. It's open spacing, and that's very a very big difference in terms of the massing of that and the size of that project relative to the lot. The same way with 1621 East Boulevard, you can't see it on their photograph, but you can go to this Google street map view. That building has a pretty dramatic abutments, from the side, and it sets back from both the side and the front of the property. And so, folks, I do not think that this building meets your guidelines in terms of context and spacing and massing. It does not reflect the character of Dilworth. And I guess, the kind of the proof's in the pudding. Ask yourself, if you approve this project, what would stop the next person, let's say at the corner, my lot, from saying, well, you approved that lot, that's precedent. When that application, let me build a square box on my lot that takes up 70% of the property. That's just a brick wall down Cleveland Avenue. I don't think he would do that. What would stop the next person who owns the building beside me, the beauty parlor, from saying, let me build a square brick box similar to the one that the Rays had approved? And if it goes right on down the line, that's my concern. You're setting a precedent for basically the destruction of the historic nature of the Dilworth, because there's nothing in my mind about this building that reflects the context, the spacing, the mass of buildings that are historic to this neighborhood. So thank you.
Sir. No, sir, thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Ray, do you have any
PJ?
Comments? Yeah.
PJ, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Christy. Can we hear all of the comments so that in case there are duplicates, the Rays can address everything all at once?
Let's do it.
Is that okay? Okay. We have Rick Cohen. Rick, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hi. Rick,
Hi.
have you been sworn in?
I have not.
Okay. PJ, will you
Sure.
please swear Rick in?
Absolutely. Rick, please raise your right hand and respond, "I do," to the following question. Do you affirm that the testimony and information that you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yep, I do.
Thank you, Rick.
Rick, if you would just state your name and your address for the court reporter first, then you may follow up with any remarks you'd like to share.
Sure. It's Rick Cohen. My address is 1912 Euclid Avenue. My property, basically my backyard backs up to the proposed development. And I think most of my comments echo, kind of what I just forgot his name. Ray, not Ray.
Ken Ray.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
Reflected in his comments. I think, the first thing I noticed is again, the biggest thing to me is just this big mass on a small lot, with the, it leaves very little room for green space and trees and kind of in context with what Ken mentioned, you've already got the Tremont, which again, not only is that should not be precedent because it's not a historic building, but it also, again, was under different guidelines and probably even under the old guidelines shouldn't have been approved. But you end up with, this huge block of just building, where you've got the Tremont and then this massive building that leaves, almost no green space on the lot. I still question the 70% when I compare I think the applicant in the previously denied application had said their building covered 75% of the lot. And if you look at the measurements that they put as setback and spacing and all that, they look the same to me. So, I'd kind of like to, see something that really kind of proves out the percentage of the building to the lot, because it certainly looks like more than 70%. And based on their last application, and comparing so the numbers of where the building will sit, I don't see anything different. It seems like most of what's changed is the height of the building. I agree with Ken as well. It's just kind of the brick wall. I think again, I'm going to have the 4 stories just sitting in my backyard, and it's going to be like a big monolith to my back. When I look out my back porch, I'm going to see this big 4-story brick wall out of the back, which doesn't seem to be in the context of what we see, even considering the Tremont. Again, their structure is kind of broken up with different roof lines and more porches, and I think too, just as one other comment that I don't think Ken mentioned, when you look at the Tremont next to the Rays building and how tall those 2 buildings were, they'll basically be people at the existing structure in the Tremont who I don't think will get any sunlight from that side, just because of where the building will sit and how close it is to the Tremont and how high it is. It's up to the roof line on the Tremont from what I see in their elevation. So that's another thing that just doesn't seem like it'll be a very pleasing from the street as you walk by and you see this, big shadows, just in that alleyway between, or, I think it's only a 5 or 6 foot space between the 2 buildings. So that also seems to be something that doesn't really reflect what we sort of expect, in sort of Dilworth and what we see in other parts of Dilworth. The other thing I'd mention too is when they compare it to other buildings, again, kind of looking at what's a historic building, it seems like, when you look at the ones that would kind of apply, which again, I agree with Ken, is mainly the Bonterra building. It's a big building, but it's also on a big lot. I understand that part of that is a parking lot, but there's still, there's some open space there. It's not just this big mass building crowded into a bunch of other buildings that kind of is creating something that's sort of blocking, again, from my view, the whole back of between that and the Tremont, everything I look out my back porch, there's going to be very little other than building walls coming out of there. And that doesn't seem to be what we would normally see in this kind of neighborhood, and not certainly what I looked out on, as recently as 6 years ago before all these other buildings around me were approved. And I think the last thing so I would mention that the size and mass of that, and I guess also on that side of the Tremont, it looks like that's really is just a flat brick wall. If I'm looking at the plans correctly, there's no porches or anything on that side. There's some windows, but otherwise it's just a flat brick wall there, which again wouldn't seem from the streetscape view as you walk by, would seem to be pretty imposing as you're walking, up Cleveland Avenue from Tremont to Worthington. That would seem to be kind of a something that's just kind of a big brick wall. So again, I think that the size and kind of the size in relation to the lot, the lack of kind of green space on the lot, because again, I think the alleyway is not part of the lot, and the space between the Tremont and the proposed structure, I don't think you'd have much green space there because it's going to be dark 24/7, it would seem. And again, when looking at and comparing it to some other buildings, that flat roof and without anything to kind of break it up, it just probably even looks more massive than it even is, and it's pretty massive given the size of the lot. So I think that just kind of summarizes. Again, I don't think I have a whole lot that Ken didn't already cover. It really is, I think the only thing I would say is I would certainly like to understand more how they come to the 70% number, because that doesn't seem to make sense to me given the measurements I'm seeing and kind of my back of the envelope math. But again, I also think that it would be better, even though they are talking about the fact that their lot drops off that 4-foot wall that myself and all the neighbors who back up into to the building are going to have in their backyard does seem to be especially massive, and somehow reducing, if not the actual size, at least the feel of that would seem to be important to me and all the neighbors who back up to it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Christy, is there anyone else?
Well, I believe Ellen Citarella and Franklin Keithley are on the line, and I'm not sure if they wish to speak on this project or not. Ellen?
No, I'm not speaking today on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Franklin?
Christy, it's Candace. Franklin has left us.
Oh, okay, thank you. Candace, is there anyone else on the line?
No. No.
Okay. PJ, that's all we have. So if we want to turn it over to the applicants for any responses.
Oh, great. Mr. and Mrs. Ray, are there any of these comments you'd like to address? Any questions you want to answer? Anything you'd like to rebut?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the question about the 70% lot coverage, just to kind of walk through those measurements. So in the front, we have about 325 square feet of space. The rear, we have 775. Right side, I guess I could actually give you the calculations that come to that. Maybe that would be easier. So on the front, we have 6.5 feet by 50 feet, which is 325. The rear yard, we have 15.5 feet of depth by 50 feet wide. So that's 775 feet. The right side, we have 6 feet of side yard, and we'll take 178 feet, excluding the front and the rear there. So that's 1,068. The average along the alleyway is around 5 feet of space. As we said, it goes from 3.5 to 7.5. So we'll say 5. That's being conservative. I think it's actually a little more than that for the average. That gives you 890 square feet on the left side. So that brings you to 3,058 square feet. We're a 10,000 square foot lot. So there's your 30%. And again, that, those measurements are including the front porch, which is all open space. They're including the ramp, which is open air space. Does not include additional 675 square feet of front yard space between the lot line and the back of the curb. So there's some other space there as well. So just wanted to answer those calculations, and that's all we had.
Okay. All right, commissioners, let's open it up to questions. So Christy, I'm going to start with you. In the room, is there anyone that has any questions? Any commissioners that have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Jill, Barth, Commissioner Lindberger. All right, I see Jill has her hand up. Hey, Jill, what questions do you have for the applicant?
Hey, yeah, thank you. Hi, I just had a couple of questions. The height of 44 feet, is that measured from the front of the building at grade? I guess really I'm more concerned with the overall height of the building at the rear property line.
Yeah, so it's 44 feet from grade, and then you would add the basement level as well on top of that, which is a 12-foot.
So what would the height of the back of the building be?
I believe it's 56 feet.
It's 56 feet. And I think that last go round we had, and I know this is a different project, but I would be curious as to the impact of the height of that building on this to the structure that's on Euclid Avenue. The gentleman that just spoke, I believe, lives there. So I would be concerned about that. But I had one other question, and that was why when you gave the setbacks, did you give them to the framing?
Not actually selected the exact brick yet, so I think they were just kind of measuring everything to the framing until we, had a.
We haven't decided if we're using a closure brick or an oversized brick or a commercial brick. So that's part of the reason.
Okay, so when it says, say, for instance, 3.5 feet from framing in the back, then you would just add the small width of a brick to that?
Correct.
Nothing
Correct.
else?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I may have misspoken on the overall height. I believe it's actually 50.
At the rear.
At the rear, yeah. I'm sorry.
And with that brick, it's just the width of a brick in a 1-inch airspace. So that's going to average around 4 to 5 inches.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Internet.
PJ, are you with us? Uh-oh. It did sound like a cricket.
Can
Oh,
you hear me?
okay, we can again. We had lost you for a minute.
Yeah, I can switch to cell phone audio if it happens again. Apologies. Commissioner Barth.
I just have one or two questions, and it's actually good that we're on this left side elevation. Jennifer, in looking at the site topography, and in comparison to this elevation, it looks like you're cutting down the forward portion of the site in order to gain access for this parking garage. Is that correct? So there's going to be some terrain manipulation associated with site work? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Jen and Scott, are you with us?
There will be, can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay, there will be little to no site manipulation. That is very close to what the site does currently.
Okay.
So if you look at that, if you if you were to look at the bottom of that building, that's plus or minus a foot everywhere of just setting that building on the existing conditions, minus where the front is, where the front porch is. It's the existing condition, but we will, where the front porch is, dig out some of the dirt only to accept that front basement level. Does that make sense? So where that front garage door is on the side and the rear exit, there will be little to no manipulation there.
Okay.
If you
And
would see the site, it literally falls down just like that.
gotcha. Okay, that clears things up. Thank you. And Christy, can we go to the basement floor plan, please? And we may have covered this in the previous submittal that we've seen. So I apologize if I'm being redundant. But so we have, let's see, 5 parking spaces there, and I understand that this lot is zoned in such a way that the parking requirements through zoning may not be all there.
Chris,
Philip?
yeah, zoning does not require parking on the site, and we don't really get into it.
We don't get into it. Okay.
Yep.
I'll take that back. That's all I have for now.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Barth. Christy, is there anyone else in the room that has any questions or comments for the applicant?
No, sir.
All right. All right, so if there are any other further questions for the applicant, let's close for deliberations. All right, commissioners.
We have
significant.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, guys, just trying to get some conversation started. There has been some significant change since the original application. Christy in the room, is anyone have any comments? Anyone want to start working towards a motion?
Yes, we have Commissioner Rumpsch who wishes to speak.
Commissioner Rumpsch, please.
Surprise, surprise. I love this. I think it's really appropriate. I understand that the neighbors don't like it. It's coming 50 foot closer to them with the height of this building, and I understand. But given the area that this is, so close to very large buildings, I think this building just fits into our historic district so nicely. I love the details. I love the front porch. I think it reflects parts of Charlotte that are not necessarily in the district, but definitely of the era that it was built. So I strongly support this. I apologize to the neighbors. I know that they feel strong about this, but I just feel that this fits our guidelines.
Did you want to say anything about not having material details?
I mean, I'm not making a motion. I'm just.
Okay, gotcha.
There may be another, coming back with details, but like windows but in terms of what the building is and how it presents itself to the street and the historic district, I think it's a lovely building.
Okay, thank you. Any else in the meeting room? Commissioner Hayden?
I look at what has been presented today and I recall what we looked at previously. And I also respect Commissioner Rumpsch's position on it. And I think there are speckles of truth and I can understand his positioning. I could see this building in other sites. I can't see it on this site. I think we rightly or wrongly, the Tremont may have set the stage for some of this. And it just, if we're trying, if this building is trying to mimic the historic buildings in downtown of a similar size and scope and direction, in my mind, it doesn't. there's an elegant simplicity in the details of those buildings that's not here. There's a materiality that is not defined in these drawings that we're seeing yet that is in those buildings. And, you know, they find a better way to fit into the context that they're sitting in rather than this one at this point in time. And, you know, the reality is probably some of those buildings were built before the residential buildings that surround them now. So, you know, I mean, there's a little bit of a different context situation there. And I think we have to be a little more respectful to the existing buildings that this thing does want to sit in the middle of. So I don't see that much different than what we saw before.
Okay. Thanks, Commissioner Hayden. Christy, anyone else in the room?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. Commissioners that are dialed in. Commissioner Walker.
Thanks. I'm a little bit more in Jim's camp, and I guess I'm still having a lot of heartburn about the overall impact of the rear of this building to what I'm guessing is probably a 20-foot bungalow sitting right behind it. And our guidelines do speak to trying to deal with scale and massing by reducing techniques that I'm not seeing on the rear of this building at all. I just see a flat surface that I think is going to be at least 54, 55 feet tall. Can't see that.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Commissioner Walker?
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lindberger.
I'm happy to go, but I know that Commissioner Barth had his hand up before me, if that matters. If you would like to speak, no? Okay, he's shaking his head no. So I had to leave the meeting early when when the previous application was denied. So I was not a part of the conversation.
Krista.
Oh, yes.
This is Christy. It doesn't matter. This is
Okay,
a
well,
application for new review.
I know, but I referenced that to say I was struggling when I first reviewed this because I could not see the difference between what we had seen in the first application. So I had to understand why, I guess I tried to understand why it was different or what was different. And I'm really struggling to understand why the other items that were denied seem to reappear on this application. And those items that were referenced in the minutes in the motion to deny. The height certainly is addressed. I think the height coming down and the front elevation right on Cleveland, I have to agree with Damon on that. I have no problem with that front elevation and how it's addressing Cleveland. But I'm really struggling with all of the other points in the new construction guidelines, the massing, the directional expression, you know, all of those things and the context of this. And I want to expand on what Commissioner Hayden said. Yes, we see this form in other areas of the district, but we don't see it in the context surrounding this property. So it's a real big struggle for me on this one, on where to go. I don't have I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Barth.
I don't have much to say other than to agree with some of the comments that Jim, Jill, and the others have said, Krista. You know, think that it's a beautiful building, and like Jim said, it could work in, Fourth Ward, could work in maybe Wilmore. I don't know, but I just don't think it fits here on this perimeter of Dilworth. And then the precedent that it sets for is some of the homeowners have mentioned going on down the line on future development could be potentially dangerous. And I agree with, I think it was Krista or Jill that mentioned the impact that this may have on the neighbor directly behind this property. I'm very concerned about that. That's all.
Other commissioners? Okay, I think I'm hearing that the building looks great. However, it may not fit into the local or the close context. It may not fit within the context of that location. Some of the people that were speaking for or against the application were, talking about the 70% of the site. Commissioners, does anyone anyone have any issues with how much of the building takes up that actual lot?
PJ, is there a particular guideline that we're referencing?
No.
In relation
No,
to that?
there's not.
Because I know
I looked
typically
at the
we look at the rear
permeability.
yards for additions, but
But that's only for single family. That's only for single family homes.
correct.
So there's no guideline that addresses that. So I probably shouldn't have even brought that up. Commissioner Hinman has been awfully quiet. Maybe her microphone is.
Yeah, no,
mute
I've
button
just been
isn't
jumping
working.
around and I've been trying to zoom in on the Zoutwell because I went back and referenced my notes about Zoutwell. And the resolution of the Zoutwell is such that I'm having a hard time seeing some of the things that I usually see is all.
Okay.
I will say I'm maybe halfway between the comments. I actually think that this is the front elevation of this on Cleveland is it feels quiet and unpretentious, and it feels like it's in the spirit of the Dilworth Tasting Room to me, which is right around the corner and is a historic precedent. So I may be more in the in-between camp.
Yeah. Well, I can't make a motion. I'm in the camp of I absolutely agree. Right, that this building, especially when you factor in the Dilworth Tasting Room, some of the brick buildings, the historic brick buildings that are close in proximity, it does fit within the context. Okay.
I'll also say, since you called on me, that the presentation we have here is schematic in nature, right? We just don't have technical drawings that we typically see. And we, even zooming in and out, there's not enough resolution in the images for me to respond at a sophisticated level.
Okay. Commissioner Barth, I see your hand up, and if we don't start getting more traction, what I want to do is at least maybe we can start with context and kind of pressure test and go around the room with the commissioners and see how everyone feels. But Commissioner Barth, why don't you, any final questions or comments?
I just have something to throw into the mix, and maybe this might help some of the commissioners who are on the opposing side of this concept. I mean, and I will say I'm more leaning towards the middle, like Jessica and some of the UTJ. If the applicants were to look at the rear part of this structure and its massing to be reduced, I mean, would that improve our view on the overall scale of this project with relation to its neighbors at all?
Christy, can you show more of the site plan of the whole block of all the smaller houses that are around this building? Looks from that there are like maybe 4 small bungalows in the back and the side, but that's, everything else is really large. And then we're right up against the, you know, the real tall building.
Sure. So
Are there more?
yeah, these are residential, but they're in commercial use. So these are,
And how many are there?
it's the whole block. So the whole block here to here is residential, as is here to here with the exception of Bonterra. I can try and pull it up on, let me try and use Charlotte Explorer, but you'll need to give me just a minute. So please continue talking.
Because normally I would agree that, you know, you don't want to erode the perimeter, the barrier, the perimeter of the district. And therefore I would be opposed to something this large in the backyard of those small bungalows. But what those bungalows are surrounded by, it's, you know, we're talking another 50 feet closer than what's already there. And I think what we're talking about saving has already been interrupted by the Tremont, which, I mean, I kind of agree that really should, that was under different guidelines, and I don't think I would be for that at this point. But now that it's there, it kind of describes the context of our neighborhood at that point. And I think I've already said that I really like architectural, but so that's how I came to really appreciating this building at that site.
So I pulled up Polaris, the tax assessor's website, and the subject property is highlighted in green. East Worthington is right here. This is Bonterra. The district extends to here. It just includes these buildings on this side of East Worthington. This portion of East Worthington is not within the district. These are all small bungalows, Victorians. They're kind of earlier vintage than other parts of the district, as well as these. And then when you move down, is this Euclid? When you move down Euclid, there is Mr. Cohen's house that he referenced. And then there are some other single family small bungalows across the street. These are townhomes at the corner of Euclid and Tremont. And then this is the Tremont building.
I mean, with this view, I mean, the impact on the rear elevation to the neighbors really seems minimal based on the Tremont and the townhouses.
Commissioner Hinman wishes to speak.
Commissioner Hinman.
I think, Christy, can you zoom out a tiny bit on this view on Polaris? Out. Yeah. So if we're looking at this view, right, part of the complication here, right, that we keep saying is that the Tremont is so massive and it's not historic context, but it's hard to ignore it because it's so massive. But Christy, if you can move the cursor to highlight a few things in this language that is being proposed, our historic references are Dilworth Tasting Room and Bonterra. And so this little corner lot is Dilworth Tasting Room. It holds tight to the lot lines. That's what it looks like. And then Bonterra, you know, is a former church. And so it really has more of a monumental quality about it. The other historic context is the corner house that, forgive me if I mispronounce their last name, the Rainers have already renovated beautifully. And it's a work-live space, I think, and it really anchors the corner on Cleveland, much like many of the Cleveland corners are, all the way through Dilworth. But it's more in the wood language than the brick language. And the series of teeny tiny historic homes that are being used for business purposes along Worthington, which are really kind of pressed into the ground. Their foundation line is almost at street level there. So in the language we're talking about Dilworth Tasting Room and Bonterra. And the other historic buildings are these tiny bungalows and this kind of monumental corner jewel on Cleveland. And Cleveland, all of the corners through Dilworth have these beautiful kind of monumental homes. And so when we start to try to reference our guidelines, I think that's really it's hard to ignore the Tremont, but that the context that we're looking at are those four things, I think. And much in the way we've talked about other districts, these properties that have monumental qualities need to maintain their monumental quality and not have other properties competing with that monumental quality. So I would say of the precedents that we can draw from in this brick language, you know, Bonterra and the Rainer's House on the corner have more of a monumental quality than the other historic properties in this surrounding area. So if I go back to this outwell, which it's hard to zoom in on, and I don't know if you can zoom in on it. I'm just losing too much resolution when I zoom in on this outwell. There it is. Right, so you can see the relationship to Bonterra. And does it go across the street? It doesn't capture Dilworth Tasting Room, does it? But Dilworth Tasting Room is a 2-story flat roof brick building. This to me though, it's an infill lot and it's still on Cleveland, still feels to me like it has an infill quality that's kind of quiet. Hold on. I went to the PowerPoint and I forgot to share the screen. So let me go back. Jessica, I might have to have you just repeat that just a little bit. Okay, so here's Bonterra that Commissioner Hinman referenced. We are on slide 71, and it's blurry.
The applicant said something about code requiring the first story to be taller than what you're referencing. I'm not sure why that was the case. But he said that was 12 feet or something like that.
That's per Todd zoning code.
Okay.
Todd zoning for NC, Todd NC requires 12 feet, I think, on the first floor.
So is he held to that in this
No.
application or
No, he's not.
All right, never mind.
Are we held to this foundation line in this application?
No.
Well, I must,
Any appearance, if it is in conflict with Todd, we govern. We don't govern things like use or parking.
Okay.
But
I think if they start moving the proportions of those lines, I think it affects the beauty of that building. So by trying to line up those standard lines, I think it really puts it into a redesign. Because if you start shortening the bottom parts of it, then the top gets heavier and anyway. Or maybe the whole thing could be foreshortened and maybe the whole thing could shrink. I don't know if that's possible, but.
Can you zoom out to the Zoutwell again, Christy? And zoom in on it. It's just hard to tell with the resolution. The foundation line to me looks like it's like 6 feet higher than the house next door, and even much higher than the, you know, proposed detached garage that's adjacent to
We're
it.
looking at the last iteration, right? This is not their current proposal.
This is what we're looking at right now is the 3-story brick building with the flat roof that aligns with the Tremont cornice.
Yeah, but I thought the proposal that they had didn't have this front porch treatment. This is a different building than what's in the rest of the proposal.
I don't think so. This is it. This is Christy. I'll go back to a front elevation. It might be hard to see because it's so small, but a front elevation is on slide. Well, we don't have a straight head-on front, I think maybe is the confusion.
No,
Here's the front.
Yeah, that looks different than
On slide 47 compared to slide, was it 70? 71. I think it's just because this is a flattened view.
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, instead of a angled view.
All right, everybody. Commissioners, we need to start working towards a motion. Since we're on height, let's start with height. Does anyone have any commissioners have an issue with the height? Or is there enough evidence to justify this height?
I need a Zoutwell elevation at a resolution that I can read in order to respond to that.
And I still have issue with the absence of any scale reducing techniques on the rear of the property. And I think that in the last iteration, we had asked for some kind of a 360-degree sample to see how this 55-foot building would impact the property that it is abutting behind it. I don't kind of feel like I have a full understanding of that.
Could I, since I like this building so much, I want to try to make it to work. If this building stepped down toward the back in degrees, if you just had the front facade to look at, does the front facade work? And then what has to happen is it needs to reduce in size as it steps down or back into the interior of the lot? Or is the front salvageable? I think the height's fine in answer to the question. I think the proportions on the front are great. So does the commission agree with me with that and feel that if the back of the building kind of diminished in size, would that help? Or that just isn't going to, the front isn't going to work, in which case we should deny it?
I think it would.
Can you show the back of the building?
Is the massing that big a deal based on everything that's around this building with the Tremont, the townhouses, there's the commercial houses, bungalows that were commercial use that are elevated higher? I mean, just taking that as its own, beside bungalows, sure. But when you factor in everything that's around it, is this rear massing really, is stepping that down really important? I just want to make sure we're taking into consideration, what's backing into it.
I think we should.
Okay.
Jim, do you think that the front is?
I'm okay with the front. I think the front's fine, but this elevation right here is more than 10 feet taller than the front elevation because of the sloping terrain and the lower levels. That's I mean, if I had that single family house back with that in my backyard, I'd be looking for a realtor.
Well, then I think if the commission is feeling that the front's working and that the back needs work and mass scaling and all that, then, I mean, they have time to come back. Let's let them come back with some options.
I would favor that.
And perfect. We can absolutely do this. I want to throw out one thing though. Can we go to the slide? And I don't know what slide number it is that shows roof forms and buildings, historic examples within Dilworth, within Fourth Ward. I just want to make a comment. And again, I agree that these pictures and stuff are out of the immediate context. But let's just look at building techniques and forms for some of these houses that were originally built as residential, 100 years ago. Let's go to the Fourth Ward one, just as an example. And yes, I agree. Fourth Ward is out of the context, right? Some of these. I mean, look at the Frederick right there. It doesn't step down. When they built this, without stepping down the rear, did they take into consideration, the single family homes, the Victorian homes behind it?
These are 3-story buildings. Popular is the only one.
Hold on, one at a time. PJ, finish, and then.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. It's fine. Go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, these are buildings that were built in an urban context, and yeah, they're simpler, but they're not as tall, with the exception of the Poplar, which has a very different setting, and has a significant amount of space around it where there isn't other structures that it's encroaching on. I live where the Jefferson used to be, and quite frankly, I wish that building was still there and I could be in that and what I'm in right now. But I'm just saying, these are urban buildings. We're not in an urban setting. We're on an edge that's emerging as urban, but Dilworth is not urban. And I think we have to be careful about how we transition between what's emerging and what's there. And we talk about gateways and establishing, transition zones and that sort of thing. And to me, we're taking a big brick box and sticking it back into the middle of the historic area. And yes, there's only a few houses left on this piece of it, but we sure don't want to see those go away. We don't want to see them transition away. So I just feel like the building is okay on its street facade, but it needs to transition back into the neighborhood. It needs to be the transition between the Tremont and the rest of the neighborhood that unfortunately now that this site provides, but we're trying to take that away.
That's what
Thanks, Commissioner. No, perfect. Thank you. Couple commissioners on the phone. Commissioner Lindberger.
I totally agree with Jim and his comments. I think it's more than just scale reducing techniques on the rear only and just at the back of I think it's more holistic than that. I think the issues are bigger than that. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay.
Christy, are you saying that that you're okay with the front, but the back needs to get smaller? Or are you saying
I agree. I think that the front elevation is appropriate. I think that's completely appropriate to Cleveland, and I totally understand the challenge with this site and everything that's going around it. I mean, I totally appreciate all of the comments and all of the arguments for this. I just feel like it needs to have a more of a contextual approach to the other three elevations. I don't think it's just stepping down the back. I don't know that will, I mean, I'd have to see it and see what they'd come back with, but I don't think it's just reducing the rear elevation. I'm definitely concerned about it and agree that we still have single family homes on two sides. of this, even though, you know, the one side certainly has multifamily and large multifamily around it. So it's a struggle. I mean, I understand the challenge, but I don't think it's there. I don't think it's what we're looking for. What needs to be there.
If I could say a word, you know, in the January and February meetings, we used the word transition a lot. We're using that word again. And I think that the applicants have gone in a good direction in transitioning this. They've lowered it almost 10 feet. It's now, when I'm looking at the survey, approximately 15 feet lower than the Tremont. And I'm wondering, you know, they tried some kind of a softening effect at the rear with those panels and some plants there. I'm wondering if there's perhaps some softening that could be done with landscaping to help reduce the monolithic look, especially on the left elevation and the rear of the structure, without changing the architecture so dramatically.
Okay. Commissioner Barth?
I mean, I know we've kind of beat a dead horse here. I would like to say that I think we need to be careful of what we're asking of the applicant and transitioning the building as we're going back. I think, you know, for me, this is mostly an issue because of how this building approaches the more residential side of the community, as some of the other commissioners have expressed. You know, almost to me, if, you know, if the back third of this building, if one story was lopped off the top and there was, you know, either a rooftop part or you know, or just a flat roof or something like that, just so the transition into the more residential side works better and, you know, is provided more privacy, I think that would help. I think the issue is that this building is 50 feet towards that residential section further than the Tremont. And to Damon's point, you know, I do agree that, I mean, the front of this building, you know, just works with, I mean, it's facing South End and all the development and commerce and everything that's going on there. And I think it's a good transition to it. I just don't think the way it approaches the back end of the site works for me.
No, great. Thanks, Commissioner Barr. So, I mean, commissioners, I mean, now we're, you know, great dialogue, great conversation, right? Some of the common themes that I'm hearing is from a contextual perspective, you know, I feel like we have more consensus about the front elevation, you know, fitting into the local context of the Dilworth Historic District, except we have some reservations about the back, and maybe we need a restudy on the massing or the scale of the rear elevation. And obviously, there's all the other detail and, you know, non-blurry that will survey and stuff that we need as well. So, commissioners, does anyone feel strong enough to start making a motion? We'll help you. We'll help you through it.
I could.
Thank you.
I could take a stab at it. It's not going to be elaborate.
We'll help you through it. No, it's okay.
I would like to make a motion to continue this application, asking that the applicant provide a additional study / options of the rear portion of the building with regard to massing. In addition to that, I'd like to ask that the applicant provide additional context with regard to some of the historic structures within a 360-degree range of this, including the properties directly behind them. I think Jessica or somebody mentioned something about more easier to read drawings. So I'd like to request that we have accurate and clear drawings that are visible, providing adequate architectural details as well as dimensions and notation.
And Commissioner Barth, when you talked about the restudy, the massing, and the re-elevation, you also meant transitioning or stepping down into the residential neighborhood.
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioners, any feedback, any big rocks that Chris may be missing that you want to add in there? Maybe it's a friendly amendment.
Commissioner Hinman?
I just want to read from this preamble document about the zoning along the edges section, because Commissioner Hayden really, I think, brought me around on this one with some of his comments. So thank you very much for that, Jim. It says, zoning along the edges of some areas of the historic districts allows larger multifamily or commercial buildings, which I think we are responding to in the front elevation of this, right? But the very next sentence says, to minimize their impact on neighboring historic dwellings, the HDC shall enforce, and then there's a list. And I think what I find most problematic and have the most heartburn about with this context is that there's been so much developmental pressure on those little bungalows on Worthington over the years, and so many people have fought so hard to retain the character of Worthington over the years. And I do think that with this proposal, we are responding to the newer developments on this block. And I do think that our guidelines are written with the mission of minimizing the impact on those houses on Worthington. And I don't know how I'm going to vote on this. I really don't at this point because of that.
May I just ask a clarifying question to something that you said earlier about the schematics versus architectural drawings, and clarifying about the Zotwell and the fuzziness? Are those things that we're asking for as part of Commissioner Barth's motion? I just would like you to clarify a little bit what exactly you mean by accurate, clear drawings with details, dimensions. Do you mean drawings, or are these schematics okay?
So what feels schematic to me about these is that this, without knowing how they were generated, this feels like a SketchUp model or something, right? And so there's not a level of precision or accuracy that this commission can respond to, because we don't know what's going on inside that model. There's not enough reference points for the floor lines. There's not enough notes. There's not enough dimensions. There's just not enough information in these for us to really dig in on the guidelines, in my opinion. And the resolution of the images in the PowerPoint, I mean, we have the benefit of these iPads, so we can all like zoom in at a great level of detail to get the information they need. And I just can't, even zooming, and I can't read it. And so, so on the one hand, you know, part of me is like, if we continue it and we have these technical documents, we could dig in and we could figure out whether this is working or not, right? Like, I can't tell how this foundation works with the surrounding properties based on this application. There's just not a lot to go on with the lack of technical drawings and the resolution of the images. Is that a helpful response?
I would just like you to clarify that as a friendly amendment then.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barth, can I add a friendly amendment that we need technical drawings and high resolution images?
10-4. I accept.
Hey, commissioners, any other friendly amendments, discussion on the motion? Well, we're not in discussion on the motion yet. Okay. Do I hear a second out there?
I'll second as I leave.
Yeah? Is that Commissioner Rumsch?
Yes, Damon, sorry.
Great. Thanks, Damon. All right, please let the record show that the motion has been seconded by Commissioner Rumsch. Let's go ahead and let's vote. All right, Commissioner. Oh, yeah. Okay. Commissioner Hayden.
Yes.
Commissioner Rumsch,
Yes.
Commissioner Hinman, Commissioner Hinman. Can you all hear me?
The motion is to continue, Commissioner Hinman, yes? or
Yeah,
no?
yes, yes, yes.
Commissioner Lindberger,
No.
Commissioner Goodwin,
Yes.
Commissioner Walker,
No.
Commissioner Bonaparte,
Yes.
Commissioner Barth,
Yes.
Commissioner Henningsen, yes. Seven yes, two no. The motion to continue passes. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Again, it's a little weird remotely trying to read the room and get people to talk. So thanks for bearing with me. I appreciate that.
You
did
did a
well.
great job. Just so everyone knows, we're going to keep the same schedule for hearing multifamily on the fourth Wednesdays. So these two continuances will be heard again on July 28th. But more information to follow. The only other announcement that I have is this is Commissioner Rump's last meeting, and we just want to thank him for everything he's done. We are going to recognize him at our design guideline retreat, which is, I know, news to some of you, that is tentatively scheduled for Friday, July 16th from 10 to noon. I will follow up tomorrow with more information. And it's also a reminder that we are going completely paperless at our, as of the new fiscal year. So our July 14th meeting, make sure those iPads are fired up and ready to go. We're not printing books anymore. But thank you, everyone. PJ, if you would close out the meeting, we'll let everyone get on with the rest of their day.
I have a
Sure,
quick
you
question.
got it. We've reached it. Yep.
And maybe we can talk about it offline, but when is the schedule for going full in person, Christy?
There is no schedule.
Okay.
We will be doing this for the foreseeable future. When I know more, I'll share more, but city buildings are still not open to applicants. So we are limiting in person to a quorum of the commissioners, which is 6. Basically first come, first served as far as getting a seat in person comes.
Okay.
But
All
I'll
right. Sorry to
continue.
interrupt.
No, it's okay. I'll keep everyone updated, I
Okay.
promise.
Anyone have any other questions? Any other business? All right. We have reached the end of the agenda. Since there are no further questions, comments, any other business to discuss, this meeting is adjourned at 5 p.m.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.